ready, Ginny? I am. Okay. At 7 p.m., a call to order and a flag salute. Okay, consent agenda, Planning Commission minutes dated June 12th.
Change in the minutes. We have East Carlson as having voted, and I don't think that's proper.
What page? What page?
There's 4 of them in your minutes.
Oh, okay. No.
Every time somebody made a
But
motion.
it's listed that we did.
Okay.
I make a motion that we approve amended minutes.
Okay, all in favor?
I'll second it.
It is approved. You were gone. Okay. All right. Oh, nay? No, okay, sorry. Al's making me nervous.
Hey,
So,
there's a seat up here.
Yeah, we got an empty seat.
yeah. Okay, topics from the floor. Anything is not on the public agenda tonight. We like to hear from anybody on the floor.
Al Peterson, 101 St. Helens Street. I'm going to be testifying during your normal hearing. However, I did want to make one comment because it's something I've been thinking about for a while and it never really gelled until recently. And it kind of has to do with the notion of driveway spacing or access spacing on streets. And it kind of has to do with a decision that was made on the subdivision, which is currently being constructed, which is owned by Wayne Wygant. And there was a lot of discussion on the access road / fire access road at the top of the development up on, what is that, Old Pittsburgh Road?
Pittsburgh?
Yeah, and the problem I have with that decision is I have decided that we need to look at streets and driveways differently. And one of the main arguments against allowing that driveway to be a street up there was that there were existing driveways and the access spacing was too close, et cetera, et cetera. But in my mind, there is a hierarchy. And the comprehensive plan specifically says that one of the goals is to have a well-connected street network, which means the streets are of a higher priority than driveways. So as a planning commission, and I feel as city engineer, city planner, one should take that as a higher priority than existing driveways, which may or may not be on the proper spacing. And what occurred during that hearing was there were existing driveways, so that new street was precluded because the driveway spacing was too short. Well, I believe that what we should consider is long-term planning of our street networks have more priority than existing driveways that happen to be there already. And we need to make exceptions in those cases. And by making that exception, that would have solved the issue we would had during the discussion with fire department access, second means of access into that neighborhood in case of an emergency, and something like that. So I think that in the future, even though, you know, there's this idea that, oh, you can't put a new street in there because there are all these darn driveways already, you have to consider, well, maybe a street is more important than a driveway, and take that into consideration when you're looking at the overall planning of the neighborhood that you're talking about. So that's my advice and idea about considering those types of things when you're looking at new streets and specifically trying to make the street grid interconnected and safer for the fire department or whomever. And during that meeting, the applicant specifically said that that was why that was precluded, was because of the existing driveways that were already there. So I just want you to consider that in future developments, that maybe the street grid is more important than some driveways that happen to be nearby. So that's my comment, and you'll hear other things later.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that one was pretty frustrating for all of us. I think we were going for the R7 and it got down to the R5. And egress from that whole subdivision seemed not available on any count because Sue would not allow that to go on Pittsburgh.
And that's where you need to make an exception.
Right. I think sight distance also was an issue there too, which is a highway problem, but
Yeah.
that. But yeah, that was a frustrating one. Great, thanks. Is there anybody else? Okay. All right, it is now 7:06. The public hearing is now open. This is a legislative and land use hearing. The subject is a hearing is amendments to the St. Helens Community Development Code. The applicant is the city of St. Helens. Because the legislative proceedings require observance of certain procedural formalities, the commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters that require statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare conflict of interest or bias in this matter?
Nope.
Okay. Does anyone from the audience want to object the ability of commissioner to make a fair decision? Seeing none. Rules for the conduct of the hearing are set forth on a handout in the table at the back of the room. Generally, order of proceedings will be as follows. Required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant. Close of the hearing, close of the record, deliberations, and recommendation. The following statements are to be made at the commencement of the hearing. Okay. All testimony and arguments, evidence must be directed towards applicable standards previously listed or such other criteria in the code or plan which the person believes applies to the recommendation. Okay, request from Jacob.
Thank you. So this is legislative amendments to our code. And so as we usually do when we're at the planning commission stage, we're going to go through each line. So for anybody who's here for the second hearing, I apologize in advance. We did discuss a lot of this in the past. But of course, this is the adoption phase. You are making a recommendation to the city council. And so it's possible we'll have some tweaks to that, which is fairly common. And I think we're going to get right into that stuff. There's kind of three things in here, three issues. One is auxiliary dwelling unit rules. We have existing rules which we want to improve based on some state legislation. We are also looking at amending our home occupation rules to limit, to eliminate home occupation permitting for those home businesses that really you don't know there's a business going on as a necessary permit. And then the other thing that we kind of threw in there were the wetland and riparian rules. And actually, I'd like to start with that. So when this first kind of came up, I was hoping for an easy fix. But we started getting a lot of feedback from the state. And so I don't think it's going to be so easy. So I think my recommendation is to jettison these proposals, unfortunately, at this time, because we have to put a lot more work into it. In the amendments, what we just simply have a reduction, a proposed reduction for the protection zones related to significant riparian areas and wetlands. And I was hoping, something quick and simple would kind of pass through It was easy to add, so there wasn't a lot of risk. And what I handed to you is something I got from the Department of Land Conservation and Development Goal 5 person. They do have a specific person for that, which is helpful. And they provided, no, I lost it, an overview of where we're at with those rules. And I mean, you can read it if you want. I'm not going to get into the details, but basically, the riparian rules may end up the same in the future, given what's known as the safe harbor rules. Our code probably complies with that. And there's the difference between the riparian area and isolated wetlands. As far as the isolated wetland buffers, speaking to the state, it does sound like ours are large compared to other cities. But it may be best to reduce the buffer instead of eliminating it, because apparently in state law, for wetlands that don't have buffers, there's less flexibility in impacting those. And unfortunately, to really revise this stuff, we have to make some solid Goal 5 findings. And if we review the previous planning documents, it talks about the Planning Commission spending over 2 years to develop the wetland rules that were adopted in 2003. And there's all these studies that they reviewed to come down to the recommendations, which results in our law now. And so it's not as simple. So that's something, we can talk about it more if you'd like. Fortunately, it's a good primer for the future, and hopefully we have more time in the fall and winter to really tackle those. So with that said, let's get into the amendments. Let's see now, can I increase the size of this with this tool? Yeah, that's good. Okay, so this doesn't show the entire code, but shows the portions we're amending. The first thing we need to look at is our definition chapter. We are amending our definition of auxiliary dwelling unit, and then adding a definition of short-term rental. The main thing about the definition is we're making sure that the auxiliary dwelling unit is specific to the detached single-family dwelling and then located in the same lot as one, and then referencing the chapter. The reason we're adding a definition of short-term rental is based on the work session we had at the Planning Commission. You felt that using auxiliary dwelling units for short-term rentals was inappropriate. So obviously we need a definition for that, which is basically, renting out a room for 30 consecutive days or less, which is actually good timing. It wasn't communicated well internally, but the city actually adopted short-term rental rules, given, I think, Travel Oregon's recommendation based on all these festivals to help with the lack of motel space. So the timing is actually pretty good for that. So any questions on the definitions?
Nope.
All right. So page 2, a lot of this is very simple stuff. We are eliminating home occupation type 1s, which are the ones that don't really show any outward appearance of a business. We feel that it's kind of a waste of time and waste of people's money. And if people can have a home enterprise that has no impact to the neighbors, why subject them to permitting? And so that's really everything we have at the top of page 2. At the very bottom, once we get into zones, we're going to see a lot of these amendments to the zoning districts where we're making sure that auxiliary dwelling units are listed as a use permitted outright. So you see that in the R10 zone, basically in all zones that allow detached single-family dwellings, we're going to make sure that that's listed. The other thing we're doing is fixing the home occupation to eliminate the 1 and 2 and just call them home occupations.
What's public facility minor?
Public facility minor are things like substations and stuff like that.
Substations and power?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so conditional uses, we don't want those to be conditionally permitted. We want them to be permitted uses because many in the industry feel that that's a barrier, and that's a recommendation from the state. So we'll see that a lot in the amendments. In the R7, again, auxiliary dwelling units permitted, home occupation fix, get rid of it from the conditional use permit part. R5, same thing. We're going to see a lot of this same stuff as we go through these zones. Apartment residential, same thing. And I found some other little Scrivener things. You know, if you notice in AR, I have crossed out multi-unit residential facilities. When I go through this, I notice inconsistencies. And it really should be multi-dwelling units as it's listed in the other zone. And see, that's why you see that there. It's not something we discussed. But I like to fix those things as I find them when I'm doing this. So mobile home residential, the MHR zone, the same stuff. Mixed use, same. Highway commercial. So a little bit of discussion on highway commercial. We don't need to worry about auxiliary dwelling units here because it's not a residential district. The question is, should home occupations be allowed in the highway commercial? They are under conditional uses, and I think that's in the past, home occupations used to be approved by conditional use permit, and I think this is a leftover from way back, way before my time. And in looking at this, a question came to mind, well, do we even need home occupations in the highway commercial zone? The only dwelling units possible in this zoning district are those above permitted uses. And in my 11 years here, I've never seen a home occupation for a highway commercial zone. And you see some narrative I have. It's at the bottom of your screen. If you're looking at the page, it's the bottom third. I propose to remove it since the highway commercial zone is more commercial centric, and home occupations don't cater to motorists, which is the highway commercial's focus. If you have a different thought.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are there any dwellings that front the highway? For example, an apartment over a business or
What I was thinking.
I was trying to think of that, and there may be one I'm not aware of, but I can't think of one, to be honest.
The only ones I can think of are on Columbia.
But there could be. It is possible to have that. So the question then would be, do you think a home occupation makes sense for those apartments above permitted uses in the highway commercial zone?
in my opinion, if somebody has a dwelling that is their permanent dwelling above a business and they want to be in a home occupation, they should have the same rights as everyone else.
Yeah,
You don't feel that way?
yeah.
Highway commercial should not be treated
In the
differently.
commercial zone, home occupation is essentially wanting to be something commercial. Asking.
In a small scale sense, yeah.
Scale, so you're already in a commercial zone.
Mm-hmm.
What triggers it though is if they get a business license and they list their home address on the license, and then we have to say, oh, okay, well, you need a home occupation. That's how most of them are started. Yeah.
Well, so therefore, should we allow them? It seems like the right thing to do to me.
What is the purpose of wanting to get rid of the home occupation license? Is it just a money-saving thing for the?
Well, we're not getting
Residents?
rid of it. So a type 1 home occupation means there's no evidence there's no evidence that there's a business going
Right.
on. So there's no employees, there's no signage, there's no vehicles with, Joe's Chop Shop or
You could
whatever.
be just working on your computer.
Yeah.
Right.
And processing those over the years, I'm like, this is pointless. This is stupid. Type 2 home occupations, absolutely, because there's potential impacts. There's customers that visit. The Type 1, it's so benign, it seems pointless to charge people and waste our time pushing paper. I've been wanting to do this for years. Jenny agrees with me in the time she's been here. So, one, we're trying to make life more efficient. Why waste time on a permit that's pointless when we could be doing better things?
The only trouble I see is, can you be accused of being biased against one home occupation against another?
I don't think so, because I think the code is clear. And I think you'll see that once we look at the amendments to that chapter.
Okay.
So we're kind of going in the order of the chapters because that's the way
Right.
the amendments are structured. But it sounds like your feeling is they should not be eliminated from the highway commercial zone.
No.
Correct.
Okay.
Would it still be conditional?
No, it had to
Just be
go under permitted. Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably a fix that should have happened a long, long time ago, but didn't. Okay, so then we get to general commercial. Home occupation is allowed there. General commercials are a little more friendly to residential since it allows apartments. Now, in the riverfront district zone, now, was there a way to not jump so much with this? There we go. Okay. There's some narrative here that this is kind of a clarification statement because of some other provisions in the code that I thought it would be good for people to understand. Because in the Plaza Subdistrict, residential use on the ground floor is not allowed. But someone could read another section in the chapter, which means, oh, well, if it's listed here, that means historic residential structures are prohibited in other zones. So I felt like that statement was necessary. And as we're going to see later on, the Holton Business District has that same statement, which we're getting rid of because we fixed that issue in the Holton Business District zone. So this is the only place we'll find that. So it's basically, that's a clarification statement. And then we got the home occupation added there. In the Mill Subdistrict, we're making sure auxiliary dwelling units are listed, which they weren't before. Holton. We don't need this 2A because we do allow residential structures on the ground floor. This was put there to make sure that residential structures were exempt from the ground floor residential prohibition. And it's unnecessary. Now, we fixed that a couple years ago, if you recall. Of course, again, we're adding auxiliary dwelling units and then fixing our home occupation narrative there and taking auxiliary dwelling units out of the conditional use permit. So that was nice and arduous. Site design review. Not a whole lot of changes, just getting rid of that type 2 and just calling it home occupations. when we look at our variance chapter. So our variance chapter lets us do a 20% reduction to yard requirements, an increase in lot coverage without a variance. It's got basically a freebie variance for additions and stuff. And we felt that auxiliary dwelling units should be afforded the same benefits. And so that's why we're adding those to the variance chapter. And that allows flexibility to existing developed lots. So now we get to the home occupation chapter. So we really start getting into some details now. So a lot of the chapters were changing to get rid of the type 1s and 2s and moving some of the content around just a little bit.
I'd like
So-
to make a point on page 10,
Okay?
about midway through, under applicability and exemptions, D, I believe it should read business ventures that exhibit no evidence that a business is
Oh, yeah.
being
Yep.
conducted.
There's an error. Well, that's why
And that was the only one I found the whole thing. so-
we like it. We always
You're
we like
very
to give it
good.
to Eagle Eyes. So thank
You
you.
did
for,
good.
Thank you for finding that. So under D, this is basically what was a type 1 home occupation. So now we're saying, okay, what's exempt from the home occupation? Garage sales were already there. The produce stuff was already there. The hobbies was already there. And then everything under D are basically the provisions that used to be the type 1. In this case, we're saying, if you don't have volunteers, outside volunteers, there's no signage, there's no clients or customers visiting, there's no exterior storage of materials or exterior vehicles that are obvious by advertising because they're related to a business. And then D6 talks about the amount that the home occupation takes up in the space, which is not more than 25% of the area. Then you don't need a permit. So someone comes in for a business license, they have it at their address, and we go, okay, well, do you meet all these? No permit, thank you, bye. Instead of, okay, well, you need to pay $75. We need to push paper for no particular reason. I'm going to be very happy if these are adopted.
So how many applications would you say you have on file that would be covered by this?
We process 30 a year, approximately.
No, so we're not talking about a great number.
$210.
30? 30 is probably the most of any permit that we process every year.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's the highest.
Okay.
And
$212
I fill in the blanks with the report.
Yeah, it's a total nuisance. You could drink a 6-pack and a 5th and still do a home occ type 1 staff report. As long as you've done it before, so you just,
Sure, but it was easy money
Is
Oh,
for the
that
city.
before you?
well, yeah, but it's, but not much, and really we should spend our time doing something more productive.
Yeah,
Um,
$205.
So that's that. Then we get into our approval standards. And so what do you have to comply with? So not a lot of changes. All the same stuff we had. You notice we took away the prohibited stuff and we moved that. We still think auto body repainting, mechanical repair outside of a building, junk salvage operation, and fireworks shouldn't be allowed. We just moved it to a different section. The one thing we are adding to the overall standards, and part of the issue was there was the type 1 standards and then the type 2 standards, and since we only have one, we kind of have to combine them. And essentially, that's what 10, 11, and 12 were the type 2 standards about your sign restrictions, your outside employee or volunteer restrictions, and as well as your maximum daily customers and time people can visit the business. And then 13 talks about exterior storage and materials being screened. That is also from the type 2. I did add a little bit. I added a sentence that if not proposed exterior storage shall not be allowed. This is something we've had as a condition for years. Obviously, if a neighbor was notified and there was an exterior storage and then they started that, that's a potential impact. And so we wanted to make sure that was clear in the code so we don't have to keep replicating that as a condition. And then number 14 is the home occupation shall be listed as a permitted use in the zoning district. And that's why through all the zoning districts, we made sure it was listed in the appropriate places. For example, you saw that we didn't include it in our industrial zones because that wouldn't make sense. So the next chapter, we changed to the stuff that is prohibited.
Is that and supposed to be hanging there on 13?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's typical when you look at codes, you'll see semicolons
Yeah.
until the last one, and then you get the and.
Okay.
So it's basically saying, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8
14.
are all applicable
Okay.
rather than or. And so the prohibited stuff is basically that section. We're just moving it. So you see that at the very end. So it's not new, it's just moved. And then,
Excuse me, we don't say anything about hazardous materials like chemicals or,
yeah, sometimes, well, you could have a janitor business and have some chemicals. You could have interior auto repair. We have some of those that come up. And in those cases, they'll work with our building official and the fire marshal to make sure it's okay. We have had some that have some chemicals involved. It's not all the time.
could we say some, is there a list of, chemical, list A of severe chemicals that should be, specially handled, that maybe we could put in that if these are being used as a home occupation, they require a special permit?
We could.
Just a
I
thought.
can tell you it hasn't been an issue.
But how do
ever-
we really know until there's something that happens? I mean, if there's a spill or,
I think the important thing is the home occupation isn't the only regulatory factor. And we still have the review process.
right,
I mean, we could put something in about hazardous chemicals and
it was a thought.
Yeah.
so the final section, I think it's the final one. Well, not quite. Basically getting rid of the type 1 and 2 designations in that section, so not too much. And the submission requirements, mostly basic provisions. The one thing we had in the site plan is to show any proposed exterior storage, just to make sure that's in writing.
I want to go back to the hazardous materials.
Well, and I think 17-120-80, the next chapter addresses it. So the director may impose conditions upon the approval of a home occupation permit to ensure the requirements of this chapter are complied with. These conditions may include, but are not limited to. Oh, I guess I got to read the code to see. Any other limitations which the director considers to be necessary or desirable to make the use comply with the purposes stated in this chapter. Let's see if there's any hazardous material in there.
That's exactly what I'm worried about. Hazardous materials or hazardous combinations of materials that could happen in a home environment and cause harm to persons.
But there's lots of people that have hazardous things in their garage that don't have a business.
Well, this is,
That's
We
very
have no,
true.
That's
we have
true.
no way of saying that.
Well, the other thing is in the business license packet, there's a wastewater treatment, the pre-treatment form that everyone fills out that says you're not putting anything into the sewer storm system that would be contaminate the system. So there's that.
As a gardener, I would hasten to see what was in my parents' garage, and they don't have a home business, but they have a lot of weird stuff.
Oh, well,
But by having a home business license, the city has at least some control. You know, we can't go to every home and check to see what's in that home. But, you know, and a lot of that material has already been examined because you bought it, hopefully, by a reputable business or over the internet by a reputable business. It's already gone through EPA and state and other regulators. So,
So there's, I'm sorry.
no, I'm done.
So one of the conditions in the code, requiring site and building design features which minimize environmental impacts such as noise, vibration, air pollution, glare, odor, and dust. Okay, so hazardous materials aren't specifically addressed in that list.
But maybe we could just add the clause, or may be hazardous to humans or something of that nature. Or there's got to be some kind of list that either the fire department or EPA or someone has that they call, you know, list A for the most, you know, hazardous chemicals that are available that might be used in.
So we do have a definition of hazardous materials. Hazardous materials are those materials as defined in Oregon Administrative Rule, and it cites that. So we could put a condition that says conditions that minimize health hazards as a result of hazardous materials related to the home occupation, something to that effect.
that
Yeah.
would make.
That wouldn't hurt to add it.
Yeah, and I'm not looking to prohibit that. I'm just looking to be sure that if the person has a permit for an occupation, home occupation, that the city is aware that that type of material is being used, as well as the fire department is aware, just in the possibility that something were to happen.
Okay, that's an easy addition. So the way I have it read now, and often the times, you know, we go through this and I get back in my office and, you know, I'll think of better wording.
Sure.
But basically, a condition to minimize public health and safety impacts of hazardous materials.
That makes me feel
work.
better.
Okay, cool. All right, so now let's talk about auxiliary dwelling units. We're done with home occupations for the most part. So we do have existing rules which have been in place for a long time, longer than I've been here, which is almost 11 years. And I've never seen an ADU permit. We get inquiries, and when we tell them the rules, you need a conditional use public hearing, all this stuff, they run screaming, like I mentioned last time with the commission. The state put out a bill that said cities are supposed to have these rules, and we're taking this opportunity to improve ours to make them a little more friendly. So, purpose, not a lot of changes, but we did add one based on the conversation that we had with the Planning Commission before, number 8, which is to, and notice how I changed where the and was. So that's that, and it's important. Create additional long-term family living situations while avoiding the exploitation of this housing type through their use as short-term living and other related business. So applicability. So the one change here is currently our code does allow auxiliary dwelling units to be related to attached single-family dwellings, row housing, townhouses. And what we're proposing to change is to make them specific to detached single-family dwellings. So that's the change in number one. Number two, only one auxiliary dwelling unit is allowed per lot or parcel developed with a detached single-family dwelling or manufactured home. Now, some cities are allowing more than one. I know several in Canada, maybe up to 3. Portland maybe as high as 2. It's been a little while since I've read some of that stuff. Oh, okay. Based on the conversation we had before, you were comfortable with 1 per detached single-family dwelling lot. So that's the way we have it written. We get to design standards. Let's see. So we're getting rid of the attached housing. I did find a little error. Actually, the LCD found this error. E stated above. Whoops. That word needs to change. It's not above, it's actually below, so we'll fix that. So creation. This is an important section. The reason it's important is because right now, as it's written, in order to have an auxiliary dwelling unit, you could convert a living area. You know, you have a house, you can convert some area, including a basement, a garage. And in my notes, I proposed to put attached garage to make sure it's related and connected to the home. Then you can add floor area. You can construct a detached auxiliary dwelling unit, or construct a brand new dwelling with an auxiliary dwelling unit in it. The one thing that this doesn't allow, and this is a good conversation to have, is if you have an existing accessory structure. Let's say you have a house and there's a shop or a shed. The way this is structured right now is you couldn't convert that shed to an ADU, and you couldn't add an ADU to the shop. And so there's a question of how do you feel about that? And as we go through this, we'll see some standards to help make sure that ADUs still resemble architecturally the principal dwelling they're related to. And you could get into issues where you have some old shop that, you know, it's been there since 1950 and it doesn't look like anything. Are you okay converting that to, or a portion of it, to an ADU? We would have to change some language in here for that. So that's a discussion item. And I don't know if you want to go through all this and revisit that, or if you want to chew on that right now.
For me, it makes more sense to chew on it while we're looking at it and then chew on the next thing. I don't know how others feel
Sure.
about it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Agree, yes.
Chew away.
Well, I mean, my feeling is that I don't think conversion should be allowed like that, because that wasn't the original intent of that structure. If you're talking about an auxiliary dwelling, then you should go through the proper procedure and develop the property for that use. That's how I view it.
Anybody else?
Well, a shop or something like that usually isn't set up for electrical and plumbing, and
Well, that's
you know,
true.
it would be sort of hard to do. Of course, it's all going to have to meet code if it is allowed. So,
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
well, I just could see there's some cases it would be outbuilding would be great. I don't know, but
I just remember a case back in early 2000 when I was shortly after I came aboard, and it was a big shed garage, and the city found out that they had plumbed it and were using part of it for an apartment. And ever since that, case, I've always thought, that that's one way to get around the rules and regulations is, you have an existing building for whatever use, garage or whatever, and you just go in and replumb it, and put in electrical work, and you can have an apartment. And so I think, though, that when you talk about auxiliary dwellings, that they should meet, the requirements of a regular dwelling, and not be converted from another building.
Well,
But-
they would have to meet code, so they
Well,
would
that's
be
true.
brought up.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've got a
Insulation.
garage that I could turn into a duplex. Well, what they wanna charge to paint it, it's a small house, three-car
What about
garage.
these sheds that are already, when they're being built, constructed to have a second level for living?
tiny homes.
Well, that's a good question, and so this is where chew now or chew later comes into play. If when we go through the rest of the code, which isn't, it's on this section. One of the things says that the air-conditioned floor area is supposed to be 100% of the auxiliary dwelling unit, and so the auxiliary dwelling unit is supposed to be, that. It's not supposed to be auxiliary dwelling unit and other stuff, unless it's, of course, attached to the house already. But a detached one is supposed to be independently auxiliary dwelling unit by itself, at least as the code's written now. So in that case, I don't know if that would fly,
It's,
I just had one.
unless it was attached to the house.
In 11 years that you have been here, you've never seen any of these ever actually happen. So that's telling me that the way it's written, it currently is not effective in allowing people to do this. The council's had a lot of people complaining and protesting that they don't have any place to put their mother-in-law, they don't have any place to put their wayward son, and we make everything too difficult. And we're short on housing. So the idea, the spirit of this is to make it safe and simple. So that's just my thought, is it's like, if I have a house, it's a 2-story house right now, and I want to go through the remodel process to create 2 separate units within my house, will this do that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
we're talking about are detached accessory structures, so they're
So-
not part of the house.
So if the detached accessory structure, the shed, the shop, the hobby building, whatever it is, if somebody wants to convert that to a living unit, then I don't object to that, provided
They meet the other codes.
update the building so that it meets building code.
And I guess it's not impossible. So let's say that the structure, the shed, it sounds bad converting the shed to a house, but let's say the shed can meet all the other provisions, as far as size, height, architecture, then we would allow it. But let's say it was, you had because right now, the maximum size for the ADU, at least as currently written, is 50% of the living area of the principal dwelling. And so if the detached shop is 10,000 square feet and the dwelling is 1,000, that's, in that circumstances, you couldn't convert it. But if you had a 10,000 or 1,000 square foot living space dwelling, and you had a 500 square foot shed, and that shed could be retrofitted to meet all these other requirements, sure, why not?
Yeah, that's about where I'm coming from. That I don't object to them using it, but I do think that we have to be very careful that it is structurally sound and a safe place for someone to live.
So you kind of see where I'm,
About requiring if the shed, garage, or whatever outbuilding, previously permitted structure. So at least you're bringing it to a standard which is not a lean-to or something. So it's already been through the process and it's built right.
But
And then it could convert, without any question.
it's been approved for use for something else originally. It wasn't approved for a living facility.
Well, but going through the building codes, you're gonna have to have egress and insulation, and that's all gonna happen with the building codes.
Yeah, but would you still require the same kind of siding and that type of thing and fire requirements?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, if you wanna state that it has to be the same siding as the house or something, I don't know if that's, I don't care about that, but, the building codes are gonna require, if you're turning it into a living for a living, so it's not gonna be a garage anymore, and that
Right.
changes the whole
Oh, sure,
idea.
yeah.
But I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, there may be some cases where the shed, it just makes more sense to rip it down and put
Well,
something in.
that would, you'd have to look at it and
Yeah,
then permit the existing and get it approved, and then you're into engineering, and so if
Yeah.
it's already approved by the city, it's something that's probably more substantial than the quote shed we're talking about.
And here's why this came up, and I'm glad I got this question. I wasn't thinking about it as thoroughly, and I got this question a couple weeks ago. Maybe go, oh yeah, I'm certainly glad I got this. So there's this person, they have a lot in the county, but it's within the urban growth boundary, and if they develop it, they'll have to connect to city, I think, water, which would result in a consent to annexation. And I was talking to this person, bare lot. What they would like to do is build a house and then build a shop with an apartment within, which would be, an auxiliary dwelling unit, but it would be a big shop. And so a portion of that shop would be the dwelling unit, but then you'd have a lot of this other area. And I told them, well, you could, based on whatever ADU rules the county adopts, you can build it under the county rules and then annex it grandfathered, or you can use our rules if you would like it. And it got me thinking, I wonder if that would work for ours. And the way it's written, if it's this large shop and a portion of it is the ADU, I don't think that would work for this. But if the shop was small enough and converted entirely so it met the size requirement, you could. So the question is, when we have these larger accessory structures, and our code already limits the maximum size to 600 square feet, so it's not going to come up that much. But when you have these older grandfathered shops and stuff, I think that's kind of the question is, do you allow an apartment within? And if so, and we'll have to tweak this language a little bit.
well, I think that if the city is serious about considering converting these types of facilities into an auxiliary dwelling, we better be sure that our our building requirements are up to snuff so that they can be safely converted.
Yeah, building code's going to address it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're addressing, where are they going to be placed at? How big can they be? What are they going to look like? Building code's going to address snow load, wind load, egress, ingress, all that stuff automatically.
And the electrical.
Oh, sure, yeah.
everything.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's beyond the scope of the development code itself.
So I have a experience with walking with my husband, and we were going down an older residential street, and side by side, I'm sure these buildings were originally built, the houses at least in the 20s or thereabouts, were two garages were right on the edge of the sidewalk. Now, if we say, if you've already got the building on your property, you can convert it, what are we going to do with things like two rickety old garages that are not meeting setback with today's setback standards?
That gets into so when we'd probably consider that to be a grandfathered setback, because the way our code reads, if it was legal, it can stay. If you remove it or if it's destroyed by fire, then that grandfathered yard or setback reduction goes away. So if it was an existing building, and you didn't have to, basically remove it to rebuild it, because that would kind of be playing with the rules, I think that'd be okay.
Couldn't you interpret the non-conforming chapter to say that's an enlargement? Or an increase in use?
Maybe.
Okay. Because it seems like that would be not meeting the intent of the non-conforming chapter. If you have a non-conforming structure, you shouldn't be able to get another permit to make it usable for something else.
I just know I've had these situations. Like recently, I had a demo permit. There was this lot that had a building on it. It was a shed. It didn't meet the rear setback. And this is one that we've had inquiries over for several years. And I remember studying the non-conforming chapter and drawing the conclusion that they could convert that shed to a house because it's an illegal existing structure. They're not moving the structure, they're changing the use within, but
So there's precedent.
it seemed okay, yeah.
Again, the large shop with an ADU in it, the reason for not allowing that?
The reason would be if we were to allow it, we would probably need to make an architectural exemption. Well, one reason it makes writing the code more complex. But so let's say you have a house built in the 1800s, has all this architecture that you see in those older houses. We'll say it was built in 1890. And then you have, and let's say it's 2,000 square feet of living area. And then next to it, you have a 3,000 square foot pole barn built in 1960, all sheet metal. Looks like it belongs in an industrial zone, but it's a nice shop and someone's happy playing with their toys inside. By this rule, you would have to change the exterior architecture of that building for it to comply, which we'll see once we get further down in the design standards, roof pitch, siding, stuff like that, eaves. So it seems like we may, for those circumstances, if it's a legally existing grandfathered accessory structure, to exempt those because it is legally existing and just focus on making sure the internals are safe.
So it has to meet the building codes.
Yeah. So you don't get the appearance standards, but from the outside, nothing changes. Still the same big pole barn.
But a pole barn is built to a different set of standards
Yeah.
than a dwelling where people live. And that's what I'm getting at.
Well, that's going to be addressed by building code, and building code doesn't care what it looks like. Building code cares how it looks.
Yeah, but you're saying that under possible proposal that you could grandfather in the use of a pole barn into a dwelling, an
And
auxiliary dwelling, without changing the exterior.
not how it's written.
Not how it's written, but
that's part of this discussion.
right. And I'm saying I don't think we want to go there for numerous reasons. The main one being safety of the people inside living there.
Well, safety's moot. Building code's going to address safety regardless if it's made of stone, sheet metal, plastic, or straw. The building code's going to address safety.
Well, maybe, but in a pre-existing building,
They have to get occupancy for a dwelling, and so they're going to have to meet all the safety requirements a dwelling unit requires.
thank you, that clarifies.
Yeah, it's not a maybe. It's a for sure, unless they do it illegally.
But even if they're grandfathered in, they would still need to change the exterior. That's not what you said originally in your proposal. You indicated that there might be the way to grandfather in an existing structure for a auxiliary dwelling. You said that like 3 minutes ago.
Yes, if it can meet all the standards. As it's written, if it can meet all the size and appearance standards. But when in the last example I gave, where the accessory structure is larger than the house, clearly it exceeds the size limitation written in here. But that's a circumstance where someone may want one. So the question is, do you want to add language that facilitates those situations or leave it as it is?
I would like to see the language say that any dwelling unit meets building standards for a dwelling unit.
That's already there. That's addressed. Yeah, don't worry about building code. Building code is building code. Building permits will be required. We don't have to worry about building code. The city does, but you as the planning commission don't have to worry about it. That will be addressed through building permits. If you convert anything to a dwelling, you need building permits.
I think the confusion, Greg, is we're saying a grandfathered building could potentially be exempt from the architectural standards that this section is saying, not the architectural standards of building code
Okay.
that may change the outer features of the building for structural purposes. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So there's aesthetics and structural.
All right.
That's right.
Yeah, building code cares about structural, and we care, of course, as public safety and welfare, but that's not the development code focus.
Okay.
The focus is use and appearance and parking and some other stuff, which we'll see. I know it's kind of weird to wrap your head around it.
We're trying to get more housing units, so.
Well, we want more housing units, but when we're cautious about it, we want safe housing units.
Exactly.
That's not what,
That's the bottom line.
yeah, they'll be safe because that's not our department.
I think, let's go back to this. I think it'll help once we go through it all, so you can kind of see where we're at. So the next thing, okay, so entrances. This talks about only one entrance, maybe located in the front facade, except in some other circumstances. We're not changing this. This is in the code already. So you can get rid of it if you don't care about entrances. I think the idea is that in a detached single-family dwelling neighborhood, typically you're going to have one entrance. And if you hide the second entrance, as this section suggests, you maintain the character of that neighborhood. So that's the purpose of this provision.
So the person gets a front door and a back door?
Front door and back door would be a building code issue. The question is where the front door is for the auxiliary dwelling unit. So if a house is facing any street, do you allow the auxiliary dwelling unit principal entrance to face that or to face elsewhere? Or do you care? And if you don't care, we get rid of this section.
Well, why shouldn't it have to face the same way that the primary dwelling faces?
As I mentioned, character, neighborhood character. It's a question of neighborhood character. So this is where you get into, building code doesn't care about this. Land use code does. Building code makes sure it's safe. Land use code cares about things like character and use.
We're looking for pretty,
Safety is what I'm looking for.
but that's their department.
So I'd like to be pretty and safe all at once.
Pretty safe.
Pretty safe.
Safely pretty.
And if you don't have an opinion, then we can move on. No issue with that?
Move on.
Okay. We are deleting the owner occupancy requirement. That's known as a significant barrier, and frankly is hard to enforce. The next one, C, the heated or air-conditioned floor area is supposed to be 100% of the auxiliary dwelling unit. Now, this is important. This is why I provided the example of the large shop. Because your auxiliary dwelling unit, if it's detached, all of it is supposed to be heated air conditioned. You're not supposed to have an auxiliary dwelling unit and then a big a non-heated addition. So in the case where you have the 10,000 square foot shop unit and you add an apartment, that's where you start to get into conflicts with the way this is written. But the idea is that the auxiliary dwelling unit is supposed to be smaller than the principal dwelling from a neighborhood character standpoint.
You're not allowing the combination of a ADU and maybe a garage right to the side or part of that same structure. And you say shop all the time, but it could be a garage.
Could be a garage.
With the, so I don't see limiting that option. I mean, the heat, you're not going to heat the garage, but you are going to heat with code the ADU.
Yeah.
Jenny's looking confused.
I'm just trying to understand if you're against the idea of a portion of a garage being an ADU or not against.
I'm for a portion of it being used, so you can use part of the shop also, or the garage, or whatever structure it is.
Okay.
If you got a big, you're not allowing it to be any bigger than a certain percentage anyway.
Right.
So take a percentage of that shop or garage and put an ADU in it.
How does the rest of the commission feel?
I agree with Russ.
If it's safe.
If it's safe.
Okay. So then,
When it
So we
meets
would just
code.
scratch
When
that.
it needs, yeah,
so we would,
that's it. When it meets
yeah,
code.
so we would scratch that section. Parking. A lot of ADU rules talk about not requiring additional parking, and I'm uncomfortable with that to a certain degree, especially in a commuter city. We see so many cars overflowing with lots. It's a real problem. And so,
No, so many lots overflowing with cars.
yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
dyslexic. We're not proposing a lot of change here. Basically, it says you don't need an additional parking space for the ADU. If you have an abutting street that is wide enough and allows on-street parking. In the cases where you do need an additional space, is when the abutting streets are too narrow or don't allow on-street parking, or when they're created at the same time as the principal dwelling. Then you need one additional space.
Did you consider the comments by the staff member of the land development on the tandem parking?
I really disagree with that. I've seen it create too many problems in a commuter city. I'm uncomfortable with it.
If somebody, okay, let me ask you this: if somebody comes in for a auxiliary structure, if it were brand new, not a conversion, and normally, if it was someone coming in for a permit for a new residence, we would require parking on the property.
Yeah. So a typical detached single-family dwelling requires two off-street parking spaces.
Right.
And if you had an auxiliary dwelling unit applied for it at the same time, then you would need number 3.
Right.
And the way I treat parking is that they all need to be independently functional.
Right.
In my experience, I remember in Cornelius, there was a subdivision where they considered tandem parking to be allowed. It was a total mess. It was a nightmare.
Sure.
It'd be hell to live in that subdivision. And frankly, I've seen it in the past where that was kind of allowed, and then, you know, what do we get? We get complaints. There's nowhere to park.
Exactly.
There's no way to get a fire apparatus through here. It just causes problems. So I'm pretty hell bent on not being. I'm hell bent on not being any more lenient than how it's written.
I think it was a good instance of the state not being connected with the community and realizing that over 80% of our workforce commutes and all require cars. So.
Yep.
Very good point.
So that's the parking stuff. Any more on that? Okay. Size. Originally, there was a minimum size requirement, and we don't care. The building code controls that. Why do we have to have a number? So that's what we're getting at with that. Maximum size. This was from, isn't this from the state model code, Jenny, where we got the 50%?
Well, DLCD wanted it to be higher.
But no, but the state model code.
Yeah, it was they recommended a minimum of 50.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from. You could have, what DLCD recommended was 50% or a number, whichever is higher. You know, this is one of those things, I wish we had permitted some, we'd have more experience with it. But currently we have it written as 50% of the living area of the house. So if you have a house that has 2,000 square feet of living space, which is typical for a modern house, then you have a auxiliary dwelling unit with 1,000, which seems reasonable for that type of use.
So would it, I'm imagining myself with a single family house and I want to build an auxiliary unit. Are we going to have people going for the largest possible auxiliary units because they want to keep their options open? Are we going to be more specific and say you can have XYZ number of square feet? How is that going to go?
Well, we're going to say, okay, if it's adopted as written, they're going to say, well, we want to build an auxiliary dwelling unit. And they may ask, how big can I go? Or what are the restrictions? And we'll say, well, the maximum size is 50% of the living area of your principal dwelling.
That's clear enough.
And then that's what they build to.
That's clear.
And if they don't like it, they get a variance.
Usually the first question is, what are my setbacks? Because that determines how big they can go. That's probably the biggest limitation that people have.
Yeah, lot coverage and yard requirements are probably going to, Jenny's right, will probably be the major barriers.
Yeah. My guess is people will try to get close to that 50%, but they won't be able to get there.
And as always, you know, if in a couple of years we see, well, this doesn't work, we change it. Like any code. So any more comments on size? Okay. Now, the next section, these are the try to keep things pretty parts. And we're not really asking for changes here other than, you know, clarifying some language on what a dwelling unit is. But so the exterior finished materials are supposed to be the same or visually match the principal house. The roof pitch is supposed to be the same as the predominant one. The trim is supposed to be similar. Windows are supposed to be similar. Eaves are supposed to be similar. Setbacks are supposed to be complied with. Lot coverage is supposed to be complied with. And this is why I provided the example of, you know, the late 19th century house and the 1950s pole barn. Because based on this, aside from some of the other things, it wouldn't work because the pole barn is out of character.
Sure.
But the pole barn's already there.
Exactly.
Right.
You're looking at it.
So that's why I mentioned the grandfathered aspect if you want to add that language.
So a section would be added to this that would say, you know, legal non-conforming structures are exempt from these architectural requirements. I mean, it's not in there now. How do you guys feel about that?
Fine, as long as they have to follow all the safety requirements.
Given. Anyone else?
I think it's fine to put that language in.
Okay, so it sounds like you're okay adding provisions
Yes,
that addresses existing
yes.
accessory structures. All right. Cool.
Moving on.
Are we going to get in trouble with 17.128.040, the addressing?
No, I talked to the post office about that today.
Okay. They don't want to use A or something, huh?
So addressing, this is kind of something to help us track it over the years. So auxiliary dwelling units are supposed to use the same principal, the address number as the principal dwelling unit. It's pretty straightforward. So if you had 101 any street instead of a 103 any street, it would be 101B.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I talked to the post office about, would it be 101 and a half and stuff like that, and they didn't like it. They preferred B.
Sure.
So this next section, and this is one certainly worth discussing, prohibited areas for these things. So where they would be prohibited would be resources per Chapter 1740. Those are wetlands and riparian areas. B are protection zones related to those riparian and wetlands. Since those are be protected, the concept is why would you advocate for developing within, and then areas of floodplains. Since the intent of the floodplain rules is to minimize loss, you want to minimize dwelling units within. So that's why we added that section. You seem to be in agreement when we talked about it before. This gives you a second chance to think about it.
You've just got 2 Bs.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
And
Any comments on that?
Fine to me.
Okay.
Moving on.
And then the next one is what we talked about before. You mentioned prohibiting short-term rentals. And when I stuck my nose in the code, it seemed like there were some other uses in the code that also kind of made sense to exempt, since the idea is they're supposed to be for affordable housing. And so they shouldn't be used for short-term rentals, bed and breakfasts, and rooming houses. I'm paraphrasing.
Does the code identify or define short-term?
Yes, if you recall, when we looked at the definitions, we added a definition of short-term.
Okay.
Which basically renting a room for less than 30 days.
Okay.
Yes.
And then finally, the last thing is just talks about our process. Site design, process it like site development review, except per these standards. So that's the ADU stuff. And that's it.
Did you take any of the state's recommend or suggestions?
I hadn't amended it
I was just curious.
before, but this conversation we had did include some of those recommendations.
Okay.
Not all, like the parking, but some. Yeah, we did.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Well, that was your presentation, so you're the applicant, right?
I am the applicant.
we have any testimony in support of this application?
Good evening. My name is Agnes Peterson. I live in Deer Island, Oregon. I have an office in St. Helens, Oregon, and I was born and raised in St. Helens, Oregon. I was born and raised out on Clark Street, out by Milton Creek. And I'm very disappointed in some of the restrictions that you're attempting to put on ADUs. And the reason for that is, number one, we have a crisis in the state of Oregon called a housing shortage. And number two, the legislature is forcing counties and cities to address this problem by changing their codes. And the date by which you're supposed to be seeing to it that this is changed is July 1, 2018. And I brought along the enrolled Senate Bill 1051, which changed the law to address this need in the state of Oregon and probably throughout the country. And I also brought the ORS 197-312, and I intend to present it in the record. Now, the disappointment I'm having with your proposal at the present time is to restrict the accessory dwelling units so closely. And that's because I do not think handicapped and elder persons that you want to have an accessory unit for should be limited to what I consider a chicken house. Now, when I said I was born and raised here, I'm going to tell you that when you use the term 2,000 square feet as a house, I challenge you to drive up Old Portland Road and tell me how many houses there are that are 2,000 square feet. And I would bet there are none. My children were basically raised in a house that my mother had built that is 1,500 square feet. So if on that property the owner decided to put in an accessory unit, it would only be 750 square feet. If you have someone who is disabled or handicapped, you need a larger area than that if you want to have a 2-bedroom unit. And I'm also here to talk about disability and accessibility for handicapped and elder adults, because I think that's where you're going to see the applications coming. So let's talk about that for a minute. There's a new report from Harvard that finds that more than 7 million rental households have a member with a disability. And according to the United States Census Bureau, 57 million Americans, or 19%, that's almost 20%, that's 1 in every 5 of the United States population have a disability, many of whom are senior citizens. The most common challenges associated involve mobility and difficulty with lifting or grasping objects. There are 5 features that are considered basic when it comes to accessibility. To help those that struggle with mobility, the most common disability challenge, it is important to have a step-free entryway, a single-floor layout, and wide doors and hallways. Now, I don't know if any of you do design, but I talked to a builder today who is involved in creating and establishing handicapped or accessible housing. And in a 2-bedroom unit where a bathroom is big enough to get somebody in with a wheelchair and swing them around and get them on the commode, it takes 1,050 square feet. So now you're talking about taking 1,000 square feet unit and limiting it to 50% of the area in the accessory dwelling. I say that that's not thinking about the handicapped and the disability of the elderly. Now, I have some experience in this field because from 1999 till 2007, when she died, I took care of my mother. And I can tell you that the best handicapped accessible bathrooms belong to McDonald's and Hooters in Beaverton. Now that's, that, as I stand here, and so they went to some thought about that. Secondly, I am glad I do not live in St. Helens if you're going to make things this restrictive for elderly people. You just can't do that. And if you have a 1,000-foot dwelling, why not make it 90% or 95% or 75%? 50% is ridiculous. Are you going to have someone's family member in a chicken coop? Is that what we're going to do with this code? And what this is a policy, and policymakers ought to look into the future. This answer, oh, well, if we don't like it now, we can change it later and increase it. Why don't you make it livable now? Now, I've gone to a lot of work on this subject because the county is considering this also. And I have brought, for someone's purview, the accessibility and visibility features in single-family homes, a review of state and local activity. I'm not going to bother you with reciting everything that's in it, but I am going to put it in the record. And this was prepared by the AARP, who's somewhat interested in the handicapped and the elderly. And the second one is written by Wanda Lieberman, who's a doctor of design in the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, written in August 2013. I suggest someone, somewhere, reviews these things that I intend to put in the record. Last, I've gone through the code sections of everybody's code that I could find that has a limit on size of units. And I'm going to, and if I'm mistaken about this, I apologize, but I intend to add this for the record also. West Lynn, 1,500 square feet in an accessory unit. Now, I know West Lynn has some bigger housing up there, but that's their limit. Salem, 900, Bend, 900, Josephine County, it's the percentage, it's limited to a percentage of the lot area. And the total footprint can't cover more than 50% of the area. Medford, 900, Portland, 800, Springfield, 800, Medford, 800, Tualatin, 800. 50%, in my view, is not accommodating the social policy that you are expected to address. So I ask that you reconsider these side limits. And then, until now, I had no intention on commenting on accessory units that already exist. You could very easily insert that if an accessory structure already exists, then the limitation of the size of what is to be developed as a housing unit can be limited in accordance with your code, such as if you've got a 5,000 square pole barn, a 5,000 square foot pole barn, and they're going to, and they have a 1,000-foot accessory, a 1,000-foot house, then if you put in a 95%, they could not have more than 950 square feet. Come on, folks, let's get going with what the policy is about. I thank you for my opportunity to present this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Was that in favor?
That was in favor with modifications.
Oh, okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I'm in favor of it with a couple of modifications, but I do want to get back to the home occupations and bring up an issue that I know for a fact occurred in Columbia City. for a while there was a broiling debate going on in Columbia City because there were people who worked for companies and had signage on their pickup. And then the neighbor turned him in because he wasn't supposed to have a pickup with signage on his pickup parked in front of his house. And it went around and around and around for a while until he finally got rid of that. So I would be a little bit concerned about that because Jacob may end up being the referee for a situation like that. So you might think about whether or not you actually want to put that in as part of the home occupation section because there are businesses out there where people do put signs on their cars and they don't think about it really up front, and then you end up with a fight between neighbors, and I don't know if you want to go there. So that was my comment about the home occupation. Also, the chemicals in the building code, there is 3 specific sections of the building code that deal with hazardous materials. There's H1, H2, and H3, I believe it is. And all those hazardous materials have certain sizes and certain containers that they're supposed to be held in, and you can only have a maximum quantity, either in volume or gallons or weight, depending on what the chemical is. And the fire department is very aware of those sections, so I wouldn't get too wrapped up in that. It is part of the building code. Now, as far as conversions for accessible dwelling, ADUs, additional dwelling units, whatever they're called, I think that I wouldn't worry again too much about conversion. Again, that's going to be addressed by the building code. Even if it is a chicken coop and it's up on stilts, if somebody applies for this chicken coop to be converted to a house, the first thing that's going to happen is the building official is going to walk out there the first time someone calls for an inspection, and he's like, well, wait a minute here. You may have put in wiring, but this thing's up on stilts. It doesn't have a proper foundation. So that will be taken care of the building code, and I think, again, I wouldn't worry about it too much. That's going to be addressed in the building code. The idea of 2 doors on the front facade, I'm kind of on the fence on that. You may get into a situation where this pole barn already has a door, but it happens to face the street. And is that going to be allowed or not, or is he going to have to move the door to the other side? I agree with the idea of exempting already existing buildings from having to reside the whole building simply because you convert a portion of it to an accessory dwelling unit. I think that's excessive. And I agree with the former presenter about sizes. I think that 50% is not enough. I know that I did download the document from DLCD that was sent out to all the counties. They recommended 75%. I think that if it was me personally, I would just pick a number, and I'd say 1,000 square feet. If you were concerned honestly about ADA, I did do a little bit of research myself, and I couldn't find any 2-bedroom house plan that was listed as fully ADA accessible that was under 1,100 square feet. And I just did a quick search. I didn't try to design something that could be smaller. I just did a quick search, and that's what I came up with. So if you're worried, if you're concerned about these accessory dwelling units being ADA accessible, and your concern was them being 2 bedrooms, I think 1,000 square feet is pretty close to the number. And then you wouldn't have to worry about, percentages and all the other stuff. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Al. Anyone else? Come on up.
I'm Linda Zoll, and I live off of Hankey Road. And this is actually very dear to me. We moved here over 20 years ago, and in the process when we moved, we brought my father, 'cause my mother had just passed away, and we brought my parents-in-law. And my parents-in-law were getting up there, my father too. And I told my husband, you got to build a wheelchair accessible bathroom and bedroom on the first floor so that we can accommodate our loved ones. We tried to do an ADU and it was just not going. It didn't progress. We were told we could build a bonus room onto our garage, but it couldn't have a stove.
And for clarification, she is in the county.
Yes,
It's in-
yes.
Oh.
We're in the
It's
county,
in the city.
but we're in the
Urban
urban
growth.
growth boundary. Okay, so having this whole discussion of ADUs come up is wonderful. And I really want to give kudos to this document that Jacob has written and that you guys are considering. So I do consider myself in favor. I also would like to say I think we can do better. On top of having my 3 elderly parents and living with them, I also have a handicapped child. And so that's thrown me into another realm of an adult child who's handicapped, who needs independence, but also, has the electric wheelchair. So I think that we keep thinking about ADUs as being for rent, so that we're going to bring in extra money, or we're trying. Many of these ADUs are for our loved ones that need to be close to us. The way we were able to get my parents-in-law was we had to subdivide our property. Okay, we're in the city, that's not necessarily an issue. We are annexing in the city, as you guys all know. I agree with the issue about the size. I think 50% is a lovely idea, but when we get down to 50% of we have some old houses on some lots that are large lots. So if you have a 600 square foot house on a 10,000 or 12,000 square foot lot, you can only build an ADU that's 300 square feet. That really limits its ability to serve, I think, your family and your loved ones. And of course, if you want it as a rental, it kind of limits that too. So my whole thing, you've heard from me before, is to provide as much housing as we can, and housing that is really usable. And I see that the handicap accessibility is a huge issue, and therefore, having those larger bathrooms, you have to have a huge bathroom that's like one whole bedroom. Well, not quite, but it's like a small size bedroom. And okay, so that was one. About the parking, I am on the fence, Jacob. Wow, I agree that we need to have dedicated parking for that ADU. Can it be tandem parking? I don't know. I know a lot of people that they use their garage, and they have a 3-car garage, and one of those places is just storage. They never use it. So having the ADU person being a tandem parker behind that place, I don't know. Maybe, if it's a 3-car garage, maybe it should be allowed. But having the for stormwater runoff, the least permeable surface is the better. No, am I saying that right? You want permeable surfaces. So I'm kind of on the fence of, how do we provide that? I definitely think, though, that it needs to be thought about. However, when we're looking at the number of people that are handicapped, my parents didn't drive, my parents-in-law don't drive, or rather my father didn't drive, and my daughter, she can't drive. So not all of these ADUs are going to be for rent, nor are they going to be drivers. I don't think that we're going to have everyone come out and say that they want to have an ADU on their property because they want their privacy. So I don't think it's going to be, I think adding some cars will be added to the street perhaps, but it's not going to be as many. But I don't know. I don't know what the future will bring. This is a whole new territory, and it's kind of interesting to see what other communities have done, and how much of a response they've had and what that's affected their parking. The last idea is, okay, so you had the storm water runoff. I was worried about that. And the last was, I think that's it. I'm proud of myself. Okay.
Okay,
So,
thank you very much.
thank you. Oh, I got it. I knew it was in there. Okay. Having things look the same as the existing house, I think, is real important. There are cases where would it be a variance if, let's say, you had something that wouldn't be visible from the street? So, for example, if you have you have a home and you want to put a tiny house, but you would have a tiny house that could go into your backyard. It's not visible from the street or from your neighbors, maybe because of plantings, because of fences. Would that be possible? I know my friends here have another type of housing that they worked with building in California, but again, it's not going to look like the house. And I don't know if there's a way to look at those forms of ADUs and how they could fit in, if there's a variance that could happen in that case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have anybody in opposition? See none. All right. Jacob, anything?
Yeah, so let's start with the home occupation thing. So I mean, Al's right. This signage on cars is, it's been a dicey thing, and it's been one of these things like, well, this is interesting. If there's a little sticker on the car, who cares? But then I've also had situations where the neighbor has, the business plastered on the boat, on the trailer, on the car, and it's everywhere. And I don't, given the personalities involved, my suspicion is it was neighbors not getting along rather than, the nuisances of the signs. We could tweak that, or just take it out.
Well, can we say something about signage on vehicles is exempt from the requirement on home occupation or any kind of property?
Yeah, I mean, vehicle signs are exempt from the sign code already.
That should be enough.
Because I see so many cars like with Pampered Chef on it or Mary Kay, and
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And then, what are you going to do? I mean, bumper stickers is going to be the next thing. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I like that.
Let's just exempt everything that's
okay.
movable.
That's easy. I was right. I don't
There you
necessarily have time to be referee for everything, so.
Way to go.
Okay, so you agree to nix that.
And as far as the hazmat, I think that Al brought up a good point. I think we just need to clarify that in our home occupation license area section. Just add that clause that it's, whatever it says elsewhere in the code.
So then do not add the new approval standard as discussed prior to public comment?
Well, if we already have it in the code, clarifying the various hazardous materials. Why don't we just add that in the home occupation section? Just carry it over.
He was referencing building code, not
Building
development
code.
code.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, if that's the case, then let's maintain what we were talked about.
And how does everybody feel?
I feel like I've been on railroad that's going really fast and it's switching back and forth. Several months ago, we started with a discussion about having space on your property for your caregiver or for someone that you were giving care to.
Well, let's
And that
let's get to
discussion-
that. Let's finish the home occupation part
I'm
first.
still working with it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And that is bothering me because of the combination of the home occupation, the caregiver problems, and the demand or urgency from the state to build a whole bunch of housing isn't giving us a clear field to make good, wise decisions unless we're really, really careful. That's it.
So with specific regard to the hazardous materials approval standard, you want to keep that as discussed prior to public input.
I think so.
Does everybody agree
At
with
least
that?
that's my proposal.
Okay.
Yep.
It's not going to hurt. It just provides another layer of addressing it in addition to other codes. Okay, so then some of the ADU comments. I think there was a lot of really good ones. So let's talk about the maximum size.
Before we do that, can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Since we were presented with this, what I consider whole ream of testimony tonight, that I would feel much more comfortable reviewing before even beginning to discuss this, because I don't really have a good. I came into it feeling one way, but now I'm sort of seeing things from a different aspect, and I like to do a little more research and studying on, size and see what other communities are doing. So I would actually prefer to recommend that we table any action on the auxiliary structures for tonight. But there's no real timeline, right?
I would recommend a maximum size of 1,200 square feet. No percentage.
Jacob, I have a real problem. Are ADUs allowed in R5?
Yes, any zoning district that allows detached single-family dwellings. Yep. R10, R5, mixed use, AR.
If you have a home in R5, you have a certain amount of green space that you have to have on that lot. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Now we come to the ADU. Where do you put it and how big?
Lot coverage still counts.
And R5 doesn't have an awful lot of space.
No, and that's why Jenny and I mentioned the yard and lot coverage requirements are going to probably be the biggest barriers, because a lot of houses are, maximized based on their size, and so then it becomes a question. If you recall when we talked about the variance chapter, where if you do a building addition or add an accessory structure, you can increase that lot coverage by 5%. So in most of the zoning districts, it's 35% lot coverage. That's total footprint of all structures. Apartment residential is 50%, and so the addition gets you up to 55. And so the proposal we have is to increase that, to allow that increase of 5% for ADUs. But, I've looked at a lot of plans, and builders maximize them, and there's a lot of lots that they would have to remove buildings or probably be limited to adding the ADU to the existing structure to be able to meet that lot coverage requirement.
Or you go another story.
Or go another story, yep. Yep, yeah, good point.
You wouldn't be, handicap accessible necessarily, but not all of these ADUs will be.
Yeah.
So it's 1,200 feet? But we were hearing
But why do we pick 1,200?
Well, so we were provided, West Lynn has a pretty generous amount of 1,500, and then a lot of, and I've seen some of this before. I've seen some 700, 800. DLCD talks about 800. Salem and Bend have 900. I'm basing it on 1,200 based on the testimony provided with a little bit of extra wiggle room. 1,200 is more than reasonable compared to most cities.
Scappoose has 800 or 50%. So they have a percentage and a max size, but it's still bigger than our max.
Well, the percentage is probably not good as the one testimony we had, a 600 square foot house and you're at 300. So
Right.
shouldn't use a percentage.
The nice thing about just having a flat number is then you don't get into, all right, arguments about what's living space. It definitely makes it easier.
Right.
It's still gonna be limited by the size of the lot.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I think 1,200
We were talking.
is reasonable compared to the other cities. So that's why it's the number I threw out.
How many lots within an existing house can put a 1,200? Not a lot.
Probably not a lot except in your lower density zoning districts.
Yeah. Then let's change it to 12. It's gonna be limited anyway.
Yeah, I think just the setbacks and everything,
Yeah,
they're going to hit the wall on some of that.
yeah.
They can use up some of the yard space, but also could build on top, above.
And nobody can say we're being unreasonable. Well, I'm sure someone could, but there's always someone. But it's still greater than a lot of other cities.
Yeah.
And, given the aging baby boomers, taking ADA needs into account is important. So I think that testimony was excellent for shaping this law.
And city council's still going to chew on the number too, so going in high is good.
Oh, yeah. they would
Okay,
agree
let's
with
just
us.
put the 12 in there.
Yeah,
It's
I'll
gonna
go
be
for the
limited.
12.
Yeah. Okay, change it, Jacob.
All right.
So we're gonna have the 1,200 and it has to meet all the setback rules.
Yeah.
The city
Mhm.
Oh,
does.
yeah,
Yeah.
So it's just your cap, your maximum size.
it's 1,200.
Yeah.
I think that makes more sense than a whole bunch of mini houses.
Now, do our building codes include handicap building?
Like ADA standards.
There's standards for ADA, yeah, there's specific standards to build by, but that's gonna be up to the person doing the ADU. They may build it just for, with plain living space, which would not be to those standards.
They wouldn't.
Yeah,
We can't,
regular.
we can't impose them.
That's in it.
No.
Yeah, we're not imposing
But
that.
I didn't know if we were,
No.
if our building codes actually had a
Yeah.
handicap.
They do that too.
Yeah, it's mandatory for, of course, commercial buildings.
Yeah.
Apartment complexes are supposed to have a certain percentage of units that are ADA accessible. Typically, it's not mandated, at least my understanding, for your normal detached single-family dwelling. But there are standards, so if someone had a disabled family member or loved one,
They'd have to retrofit the dwelling.
or build the
Or
the
build
new
it
one
to it, that's
according to the proper standards.
I mean, we can't mandate that.
No.
No.
And they wouldn't have to follow.
Why would we?
So there were some other things discussed, and I don't know how much that motivates you to recommend changes as far as the parking and the architecture and stuff like that. If you want to recommend any changes based on what we have, or stick with what we got for the council.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, since we've put in an actual figure now, it's 1,200. Now, so we've upped the amount. of maximum space. Now we're gonna have an additional requirement of one additional parking space, right?
In some cases, in the cases, so you don't always need an additional parking space. But the cases where you do need one is if the ADU is built the same time as the house, because then it's easy, you're starting from scratch.
Right.
Or if when no abutting roadway is at least 20 feet wide, because that's the minimum you need for fire apparatus access, or when no abutting street allows on-street parking. So basically, there's nowhere to put the car,
Yeah.
or it's new. That's when you need the space. Otherwise, it's not mandated.
Okay. All right.
So it's circumstances where it's either easier to do it, or
You have no other option.
you're going to have some problems if you're relying on on-street parking, which doesn't exist,
All right.
or which is going to block through traffic and create safety problems.
I think we just leave it
Okay.
to
Yeah.
items.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then Greg, you wanted to table this, or would?
Well, no, I mean, I'll go along with the 1,200.
Okay.
You know, when we were originally talking about, throwing out the 50%, I had some real, concerns after some of the testimony that was presented. But if we're willing to go to that higher figure, I think that addresses. Because certainly not everyone's going to meet that, We won't have that many lots. But at least it gives us something to work on.
Okay.
Chair, if there's no further questions of staff, I don't think we've closed the hearing.
Oh, okay, sorry, the applicant is confusing me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the applicant,
Okay, this hearing is closed.
the
and
applicant
we've
is always confusing.
Okay, do we have a vote?
This is a recommendation, remember?
It's a
Oh.
recommendation, yeah. All in favor?
Well, has everybody's questions been answered?
Mine, yeah.
Okay.
Feeling much better now.
Yeah.
What about the?
All in favor?
Well, what's?
Well,
Yeah,
I have my notes, so you can recommend as discussed.
Yeah, there's so much.
Fortunately, this is a recommendation. It's not the formal decision, so.
so we're going to recommend text amendments to both the auxiliary dwelling and the home occupation, and cut out the wetlands and riparian area.
Yeah, that was already taken out.
Good. Okay.
Because early on, given the discussions with the state, it was like, dang it, it's not going to be easy. I was hoping we wouldn't get comments from them, and so we could just kind of, easy to fix. But it didn't work out.
And the proposed changes that we discussed tonight, the signage for the vehicles, take that.
Yeah, I would just say recommend as written with the changes as discussed and agreed upon by the planning commission.
Okay, including the 1,200.
Yep.
So moved. Recommend.
Okay,
Second?
second? Okay, moved in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none?
And I appreciate the testimony that the people brought to the commission.
Actually, I do too. It was extremely helpful. Thank you all for coming.
That is what makes better law,
Better law, yeah. Made us think.
we hope.
All right.
Oh, my God.
Anybody wanna
You want more coffee?
Yeah, give us 2
take
minutes,
take a 5-minute break here?
Yeah.
please. No, go ahead.
Your mics are all still live, just so you know.
Okay. Yes. Here we go. Do we have any rules about marijuana facilities being XYZ number of feet away from a public school or public park? I think we already have that, don't we?
Yeah. Well, Aggie had these letters I was looking at out too.
just had somebody
You just put it, from my understanding, last month, you just
gave
approved
permission
a
for a childcare.
childcare center
Yep,
right across the street over here.
we did.
And that's within 1,000 square feet. Her Agnes and Vanetta's
There's
offices
with
are
above
up
the
above.
church
Down
daycare
below,
center.
they have
She's
that
absolutely right.
Church and daycare center. That's within 1,000. Telling you.
No, not there. They can find a different place somewhere.
There's plenty of empty places.
Thank goodness we got rid of the wetlands, or we would have been here till 10:30.
Good thing Dan was here too. Yeah, I would have gone. I just do it for the hearings.
I can't sit anymore. I am.
Stand to do the next one.
Oh, it'd be funny.
I don't even think we need to hear the next one.
All right, it's 9:05, and the public hearing is now open. This is a quasi-judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is to request for a conditional use permit. The subject property is identified as County Assessor's Map 3700 on map 4N1W-3BA. The applicant is Robert Lee. The owner is Robert Lucas. Because the quasi-judicial proceedings require observance of certain procedural formalities, we'll take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters that require statements. Does any member of the commission declare ex parte conflict of interest in this bias matter? Seeing none. Does anyone from the audience object to the ability of a commissioner to make a fair decision? Seeing none. Generally, the order of the proceeding will be as follows. Required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, and deliberations and discussion. The following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to City Code ORS 197.7635. The following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. St. Helens Municipal Code 17.100.040 1A-F. All testimony, and arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria as described or other criteria in the plan, such as a comprehensive plan or land use regulation, such as that found in the Development Code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions or approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes to appeal to LUBA, a Land Use Appeals Board, on the issue that precludes an action for damage in circuit court. Okay, we have a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is to establish a marijuana retail establishment in an existing building at 100 St. Helens Street. The first thing I want to mention is we did receive some written testimony. Most of it we received early enough to attach it to the report. An email from Ron Schlumpberger, who owns an adjacent property. We also had an email from Agnes Peterson as well as Robert Venata. Those letters, I think I said email, those letters were attached to the report. One thing that I received today via email is a letter from Elliot Michael, which I'm going to hand out to you right now.
There's not a letter here from Schlumberger. Yeah, he mentioned that. While you're doing that, Mr. Planner, I wanted to raise a question that's on everybody's mind. Does the fact that this commission a month ago approved a child care facility in the one-time Pythian Sisters building have any impact on the proposed application?
We will get to that shortly.
Okay.
When we review the conditional use permit standards that the city code has applicable to this kind of use.
Okay.
That is an excellent question, though.
Well, we all had it.
Yeah.
We all.
And it's one that has been addressed in some of the written testimony.
Okay.
And may come up in the verbal testimony, too. So, we had kind of a rash of these, and then everything was silent for a while. And now we have another one after several years. Interestingly, we've had 3 or 4 applications, and currently we have 2 of these in town, one along the highway, one in Holton by the Chronicle. The 3rd application was in the Muckle building. That actually was probably the first one we had.
Right.
And they never used it. They had the permit, so it was vested, and they obtained both of their eligible time extensions, and they decided to not go through with it. And because of our 2,000-foot rule between such establishments, which we've had for, which is in our code, this location wouldn't have been eligible as long as the conditional use permit from the Muckle building was still valid. But they let it expire finally. They didn't reapply, so that opened an opportunity for this building, given the 2,000-foot rule, which we'll talk about pretty soon. But let's talk about this building a little bit. It's one I'm familiar with. Combined with my time with Columbia County, I've been driving by it for 12 years. And in that time, it's been a legal office, and then more recently, there was a chiropractor in there. And now, of course, they want to use it as retail. Digging in history, it looks like it was approved in 1988 through a site design review. Of course, you know where it's at. It's in the corner of St. Helens and First. A little underdeveloped according to our current standards as far as landscaping and stuff. But in the 80s, I think things were a little different, obviously. So some of the things we look at with development, is there a trash enclosure or not? There's not. That's also a requirement for marijuana facilities, which we'll get into pretty soon. Let's talk about parking a little bit. So for retail sales, we require one space for every 400 square feet of gross floor area, but not less than 4 spaces. It's not that terribly big of a building, just a little over 1,300 square feet. So basically, we're talking about 4 standard off-street parking spaces required. But one thing that's lacking on the property is a disabled person parking space. And since it's going to be retail, we have to consider that. There's currently 5 spaces, and that ADA space is more or less 2 spaces because of the wheelchair access aisle that's required. So they probably can get that to work. Of course, we'll need a revised plan to show how that's going to make sense. Another thing we have is a requirement for wheel stops. That's a standard for parking spaces along the perimeter of a lot. And in this case, where that makes where that's very logical, is you have parking spaces that face the sidewalk along St. Helens Street. And as a retail establishment, there's going to be more traffic there, a more greater turnover of customers, assuming it's approved, of course. And we want to make sure that those variety of people do not park and encroach into the sidewalk, thus necessitating wheel stops. Landscaping, there's not a whole lot of landscaping on it. We didn't write it in as a specific condition, but certainly that's something that you can consider as part of your conditions, especially because this is a conditionally permitted use. So that's something to think about. Also in that regard, if you look at page 4, the picture in the upper left-hand corner, that abutting building has a commercial suite in it, but also has residential structures. And there's a question of do you ask for some type of screening between those two? Of course, you have a sea of asphalt and a limited room, so that's something to contemplate. We also talk about lighting and crime prevention, and that reveals itself in the conditions. But before we get to the conditions, let's talk about our specific standards for these kind of uses. And this gets to Greg's question, and I think everybody's question. So no marijuana retailer or medical marijuana dispensary shall be permitted to locate within 1,000 feet of any public or private child care facility, preschool, elementary school, junior, middle, or high school that lawfully exists at the time the conditional use permit application is deemed complete. The last part of that sentence is critical for this answer. That lawfully exists at the time the conditional use permit application is deemed complete. So we have an approved conditional use permit for a daycare at the Masonic building, which is certainly within 1,000 feet. I talked to the building department today. They've received no permits whatsoever. So in order for that use to be lawfully established, they need a change of occupancy and a certificate of occupancy for E classification, which is educational, I think, according to the building code. So there's a whole other step before that use is vested. It's not vested and thus doesn't count towards the 1,000-foot requirement at this time. So that's that. The nearest child care facility that we are aware of, which is legally vested, is Berry Bright Preschool at 560 Columbia Boulevard, which is about 1,300 feet away. The next standard is that no marijuana retailer or medical marijuana dispensary is supposed to be within 200 feet of another such use. And if the conditional use permit was still good for the Muckle building, that would be a problem. But since it died, the closest one is up in the Holton area, which is just under 5,000 feet away. And when the council adopted this, the 2,000-foot rule was intended to prevent having an excessive amount of these kind of establishments in town. That was kind of the intent of that. The next one is that it's supposed to be in a permanent building. They're not proposed to put it in a tent, so that's pretty easy to meet. There is a standard that requires the refuse containers and collection areas to be secure, and there is no trash enclosure. So that's something that we would look for, and that's reflected in the conditions. And then there's also a stipulation about complying with law, and we have our city business license stuff, and so that's something they'll have to do if they get through the other permitting processes successfully. As far as some of your options for requiring conditions, on page 6, it mentions that the Planning Commission may impose conditions on its approval of a conditional use, which it finds are necessary to ensure the use is compatible with other uses in the vicinity. And there's a whole slew of examples like limiting hours, additional setbacks and stuff like that. It's basically your time and place requirements. So that's something to think about. But I'll just go through the recommended conditions, and then we'll open it up for other people to talk. Condition 1, the conditional use permit is valid for a certain amount of time. If you don't use it, it expires. So they would need to get their building permit in, for the change of occupancy if that's necessary, or otherwise establish the use. Number 2 is the stuff we need before a development permit is issued, and that's our crime prevention plan, such as exterior lighting, our trash management plan, that's our refuse container, trash enclosure, and then a revised site plan. And the site plan is going to show us where the trash enclosure is going to go, where, and the parking, how they're going to meet the revised parking standards, the ADA space, the wheel stops and that stuff, which are memorialized there in condition 3, the things that we want to see before certificate of occupancy or commencement of the use, the wheel stops, the ADA space, proof that it's licensed from OLCC. And then we have one highlighted as kind of a placeholder. If you feel that landscaping and screening requirements are warranted, that would probably be the place to put it, but we'll see how the discussion goes. And then we have some of our general conditions. Number 4, and note it says any new service facilities. In this case, if you look at the pictures, you will see that some of the rooftop mechanical equipment is very visible. That's something we wouldn't allow today. And Jenny and I kind of discussed this, do you require them to screen that now or not? And it's a tough call. If it was a proposal that was going to substantially change the building, I think it would be easier to require it. But the changes aren't that drastic, so the condition says any new service facilities. Any new sign requires a sign permit, shall comply with local state laws, and the development code still applies. Questions?
Let me ask you this. Attorney's office, legal office, is that the same as a commercial building? Does that have to go with same rules as a commercial building, or is that held to a different standard?
I don't know if it would be a B to a B. It seems like it may be, but I had that conversation too long ago with the building official to remember it well.
So, question, what about the proximity to a theater just kitty corner across the street that has movies for kids?
Well, this gets into, is it black and white or is it 1,000 shades of gray? So obviously, when you look at the conditional use permit standards, what is in black and white is clear. You have that 1,000-foot rule from schools, well, not colleges, but high school and below, child care facilities. And so it calls out the specific uses where children will be known to congregate. When you get into other uses, and these are kid-specific uses. When you get into other uses, which may have a lot of kids or not, it becomes an interesting question, and probably one that's going to be debated with oral testimony. And I think I'll let that testimony
Speak for itself.
yeah.
I have one question. Does Sunday school count? Do youth programs that exist in that
In a church, for example?
in that storefront that's next to the theater that are focused at youth, does that count as a school or does it not?
I don't think so.
Just I'd ask.
Yeah.
I do remember specifically the park being brought up during the Muckle building discussion when that was approved too, because children congregate, there's 13 nights and a lot of other activities. So it's
Well-
something that was discussed back then and ultimately it was approved.
You had a question?
I'm thinking of the bigger picture too. So with the plans for the city, with revitalization and development and everything, would something like this affect grants or any kind of grant? Like we're looking for grants. Would that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember the Port of St. Helens was really nervous about having any marijuana type use on their property because they didn't want to get crossed with the federal government and be ineligible for grants. The city allowing these in the thing is a city could prohibit them, and it's been a while since I've thought about some of this stuff, so take this with a little bit of grain of salt, but like on Eastern Oregon, where you have a lot more conservative counties, Measure 91 was shot down. And so it was very easy for them to say, well, they didn't need to allow it. Mm-hmm. And in our case, it passed pretty well. Man, I wish you asked me this question yesterday so I could research my history.
We've already crossed that line.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember if we could just say no if we're able to. I don't recall. I could go to my office and find that stuff to remind myself.
Well, maybe what we should do is let the testimony,
But the fact of the matter is our code allows it,
right,
and this is being applied based on our code.
right.
And I will say that we have received grants since we've allowed them from a number of federal agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency. We're applying for a HUD grant, which is through, another federal agency. So that's not a question they ask for eligibility
Okay.
of those grants.
Okay.
And it's a good question. And the other thing to consider is our code doesn't say the city shall now not allow this use if it shoots it itself in the foot for grant eligibility.
Well, we also have to be very careful in how we apply. We have to make sure that the rule applies equally to everyone,
Yes.
and that's the most important thing. And I think we just need to listen to the testimony and see where it goes.
Okay. Any more questions, Jacob? All right. Could we have the applicant come forward and give his testimony?
So sorry, I'm unaware of the process, but my name is Robert Lee, and I'm the applicant for the space off 100 St. Helens Road Street.
Can you give us your address?
We don't require that anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was the
Oh,
question?
we don't require that, so
Okay.
never mind.
I guess I'll just start. But so I've been a little bit of history, like in terms of my personal history. I've been in the cannabis business for about 6 years, primarily building retail storefronts, and it's been in Portland, and I've owned and operated several stores, and basically. Right now, I'm building several and basically looking to create a high-end brand, and as a business person, I mean that's obviously not the goal for this meeting, but that's obviously my intent. But in terms of my experience with cannabis businesses. I have seen a lot of positive effects, and actually contradictory to what a lot of people assume with cannabis businesses going into communities. I've seen it actually have a paradoxical effect where it actually helps with blight and helps actually with the community and being kind of a positive place. And I've experienced that firsthand, and so I would say that obviously with this location too, it's been vacant for about a year, and I know it's a vital part of this area, and this particularly the street, because coming into the main downtown area, it's one of the first buildings that you see. But I would ensure that we would be, especially now, we stay away from traditional, like cliches of marijuana. We wouldn't have a big pot leaf on top of our building and advertise anything like that. We would definitely be looking at, again, a high-end retail brand, and that would basically be the focus, is just creating better lighting in the area and having a nicer storefront that should add to the vitality of the community, as opposed to being something that is even as toxic as a bar can be. And I guess that's an argument too, is that as a marijuana dispensary, we're just dispensing what could be considered medicine, as opposed to if we had a bar that was contributing to the community by having drunk patrons. And I guess the argument is, well, do we make the same arguments when a bar is 50 feet away from a school? Obviously, there are these distance requirements in place and I don't think it's a bad thing at all from the OLCC and from different municipalities. And I would just say that, you know, according to the rules, it's there because we want to stay away from, you know, advertising any marijuana to kids. And actually, you know, per state regulations, when we you know, like there's certain like cliche names are avoided in terms of advertising to kids, and you know, and that's definitely not our intent as responsible business owners in the cannabis community is to promote anything related to children. And so, you know, all I would like to do in terms of being a business owner is provide a high-end retail location that, you know, is a good, positive member of the community. And, you know, obviously, you know, we would look to contribute to the community as opposed to do anything on the contrary. So I guess that's my testimony for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have any testimony in support of this application?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Bob Lucas. I'm a local attorney. My office presently is up in Rainier. I formerly was here. I've been in this community for 40 years, starting out as a district attorney and then in private practice. That building that is subject to this hearing, I've owned about 25 years. It used to be Kelly's Kitchen, for any of you that were around then. It was a small restaurant. When I bought it, I added to it. There was quite a bit of overhang there, and so I built the walls out to the edge of the overhang, bricked the building, put the landscaping in, made it look nice, and it still looks nice. In fact, I got a commendation from the city of St. Helens after that was remodeled, commenting on how nice of a job we did. I love Old Town. I used to own the Muckle Building. I kind of brought the Muckle Building back to life. It was a derelict, vacant building for an awful long time, decades, if you will. And it went bad again, but now they're really doing a good job with it, better than I did. I didn't finish it all up. But I'm interested in Old Town and always have been. I wouldn't rent my building out to anybody that's going to do anything damage that I can think of. Frankly, I'm not a marijuana supporter. I didn't vote for it. But I know the people in Oregon did, and so I go along with the crowd in that regard. There's a lot of emotion still out there by a lot of us older folks who don't want to have a thing to do with it. But we can't really run our lives that way, or the city can't. We've got to kind of go along with the crowd. Old Town is becoming a tourist, if you will, spot for a lot of folks. The boating that takes place out here is amazing. And I think it'll be an addition to Old Town to have a spot where boaters, if they want to, can come and buy some marijuana. Now, you don't smoke it there like you do alcohol in one of the taverns or the bars down here. You know, so nobody's going to get high on marijuana buying it there and hanging around. I think it's way less onerous and not as much of a problem as the taverns and bars are for the young kids who might see people under the influence or almost under the influence as they're leaving these establishments. At the same time, they're legal, and it kind of bugs me a little bit to see a second standard now being applied by a lot of folks because of this marijuana old, if you will, old attitude. I hope, and you must have accepted, you know, the decision of the folks. But you've already approved apparently 3 sites in town, including one at the Muckle Building that apparently, as the staff, as Jacob said, has gone away. So that makes this building eligible. I don't know that you could do any better with somebody else that might come apply for Old Town. This is, I think, a reputable company. They've got experience. It's a nice-looking building. It's in a good location. I hope you do what's right and true. And emotional arguments that can be made, even some shaky facts. For instance, this daycare center that there's no sign for a daycare center at the bottom of their store. And I'm told that the permit process isn't complete, or that it was a temporary thing, apparently, because they've got to go through the building permit process before they really get the occupancy permit. So that shouldn't stop this project. Now, at the same time, if this project is approved, it'll have no bearing on them getting that permit, because they don't have the same requirement that they can't locate within 1,000 or 2,000 feet of a marijuana dispensary. And so, I think they can both live together without there being a problem. The feed is another red herring. It'd been real easy for you folks to recommend, and the city council to approve an exclusion for a theater. You can't locate within 1,000 feet of a theater. That wasn't done. And so now to bring that up as a possibility to deny this, I think is wrong. It shouldn't be done. With reference to the staff report, I want to comment on some of this. You know, this is an existing building. It's not a new development. I know that there's some loose language that allows some new development standards to be applied because of this conditional use permit that was approved for marijuana establishments. No problem on the parking lot car stop. They probably should, I should have probably done that years ago myself. Don't know why I didn't think about it. And so the parking shouldn't be an issue. Now, by the way, there is 2 parking spaces at the end of the building, between the building and the commercial building of the residences up above. I had them there for my employees, for me and one of my secretaries to park there. That can be converted over very easily to a handicap, because there's really 2 spaces there.
So there's 2 side by side there?
2 side-by-side spaces, yes. And by the way, my property goes right over to the upright post for the building next door. I've allowed them to park there because we haven't had a full staff for some time. But they know that's mine. In fact, a while back, they painted the blacktop underneath the overhang, and put a long white mark on my property. And I went over and talked to Ron, was real nice about it. They painted it out. They know where the property is. Outdoor lighting, I don't understand that, because there is an outdoor light by the back door. In fact, there's 2 floodlights there. And there's also an exterior light in front of the front door. And so I don't see the need for more exterior lighting. There's also a street light on that very corner and across the street. There's 2 street lights at that intersection. It's plenty well lit up. I've owned the building a long time. There's never been any kind of crime spree or any indication that there's anything going on there that would create a place where you have to have some extra protection. So I would suggest that the expense for lighting, the wasted resources for additional lighting, and for the extra kilowatts that would be burnt would be wasted. It shouldn't be required. But again, that's a decision you folks will have to make. There is no alley behind there. You know, you can look at the pictures. There's a property line there someplace, and I suspect it's going to be right close to where the neighboring building is. There's only a couple feet in there to walk through there, so I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. But screening, wow, screening would be a real problem. We couldn't plant trees high enough along the side to screen off the whole building from their residences. I mean, that was approved when those residents were there. And there's never been an issue to my knowledge. We've gotten along fine. There's been no complaints. I don't think there will be now. The screen, the stuff up on top, you really can't see that stuff from the street. And I'm sure they can see it from the second story up there. If you're far enough away, you can see a little bit of it sticking up. But, gee, it's been approved. It's not a new development. It's not a new air conditioning unit or whatever. That's what's up there. It's the heater air conditioning unit. I would think the screening would be, again, another unnecessary expense. There's been no complaints from anybody that I know about it being unsightly or anything. Landscaping is good. I submit it's sufficient. There's planters there at both ends. There's some good-sized bushes. When it's maintained, which is part of the time, and I'm sure it'll be maintained better now. It was maintained good when I was there. But I've had, by the way, different tenants over there. There's been an accountant there. There's been a counselor there. There's been some other attorneys. There was this chiropractor recently. And so I would suggest that to require extra landscaping, that would make it very difficult. You'd have to take away some of the hardscapes someplace. Get rid of a parking spot or do something. It just seems to me that this was approved, it's existing, maybe we shouldn't, mess it up, and it'd be difficult to do any extra landscaping. I don't really have any more comments, I just ask that you do what's right and don't let emotional arguments or shaky facts unduly sway you. And I'd answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thanks very much. Do we have anybody else, testimony in support? Would you come forward and give us your name and? Oh. Okay, it's all right, ready to go. Okay, well, we're getting close to, any neutral testimony? Seeing none. Any testimony in opposition of this application? Here's your opportunity.
You're on, buddy.
I don't have an address because you don't want it. My name is Bud Hickey. I was born on this rock pile up here they call Knob Hill. I've been here almost 80 years. I've known Bob Lucas, said he was probably in his diapers, so Bob and I get along. I own the building next door, and I've had it for over 50 years. He's only had his for 25. So now that we got the age groups out of the way, my concern is, and Bob already touched on it, I have never had 1 ounce of problem with any type of problems with anybody damaging my buildings, doing anything around there as far as anything like in 50 years. Bob just said he has had no problem in 25 years. I'm saying here that I'm not exactly familiar with the marijuana, but I do know that the kids come by and they kind of respect it. Now, I don't know what type of environment. The gentleman, Mr. Lee, said that he's going to have a high-end operation. Well, that's fine. I don't know the difference between low-end and high-end. So all I can say is that I am concerned that if he does go in there and if the council or the commission or whatever grants him this deal, that there better be some secure situation that they can assure that this is not going to draw a problem in this downtown area, whether it's the Lucas's building or my building, because neither one of us have had any problems. So I just don't know how that addresses it, how it falls into the code as far as the licensing. What I am concerned about is nothing's going to happen to my building in the next 50 years because maybe I might still be alive then. I don't know. But my concern is if there is any mingling or any gathering of people around. Now, we've got this downtown area. We've got some problems not too far away, over a few blocks away. We've got some people over there in 2 or 3 big houses over there that do have some chemical problems, and the government takes care of them. And I don't know if that's those buildings over there come within the distance of the situation of it would cause them to want to draw towards the area. They're only a couple blocks away, so if they start drawing towards that area, you know, they're sitting out there in the street. I don't know if that would have a bearing on it, but I would want to make sure that we're getting no conversation and we're getting no people coming out of those buildings that have these chemical imbalances and filtering over there. I don't know, I'm quite sure you have to be 21 to buy marijuana. I have nothing against marijuana personally. I've never smoked a joint in my life. I've always told everybody that's around me, on my dying day, in my hospital bed, if I'm still alive, I'd like to try 1 joint. And I'm not saying that that's what I'm supporting. I'm supporting my property, and I'm concerned of nothing happening to it in the near future. And if they can come down here and assure us that, then I might be more open to it. However, if there's a problem, then how do we address it? That's what I'd like to know. Anyhow, that's my input. I'm the property owner next door. Thank you.
Does do your decks overlook the parking lot? Is that what I'm seeing here?
Pardon me?
Do your decks overlook the parking lot?
No, that's
In
the
the back?
building on the backside. I'm the one that's the building here with the.
On the right?
The old ice house.
Oh, the ice house, okay, all right.
Is there
Pardon me?
Stone exterior?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Schlumberger's on the backside, I'm on the front side.
Okay.
Okay.
Schlumberger's over here on this.
Yes.
I'm just build, right here.
Very good.
That was the original ice house, right?
Yep.
Pop, deer, bootleg.
Same thing as, yeah,
Okay.
just a different,
My name is Agnes Peterson, and this is deja vu all over again. When Mr. Lucas came to town, he was the district attorney. He came in as the district attorney. And he was elected in 1970 and 1974. And since Bud pointed out that we're gonna get the age and the time out of the way, I'm going to say that I predate both of them. I have owned an interest in the building where we are. I started practicing there in 1960, and shortly after that, Benetta and Peterson bought that building, and we have the building, which doesn't show on any of the pictures, but is sort of kitty corner from this building that Mr. Lucas wants to rent. Now, Mr. Lucas, in his own fashion, and I've seen his fashion for many years, accused anyone that was against this as being emotional. It was an emotional response. Guess what? I'm not going to do an emotional response. I'm going to talk about your own laws. And let's start with what your ability is as far as a planning commission member in looking at your codes. I think Jacob will agree with me, and if not, I will disagree vehemently with him, that you folks have the ability to interpret the code that you have. And so let's talk about the very first question that was asked in the beginning. I guess first I want to go back and say whom I represent. I represent Benetta and Peterson. We had a full partnership meeting. All the partners met and agreed that I would come here and oppose this application. And we rent our downstairs to a church. I'm sorry to say that the minister for that church has been very badly injured. If he were not so badly injured in an accident about a month ago, where 22 of his bones were broken, I'm sure he would have been here talking about his church and his rehabilitation center and what he tries to do for the children of the people who are abused. And the second outfit that I represent are the Peterson Children Trust. And the Peterson Children Trust owns the property directly across from this, which is known as the Wild Current, and then there's a little architectural building at 101 St. Lawrence Street. Both my partner and I and the Peterson Children Trust are vehemently opposed to this proposal. And I think the first thing you ought to do is look at 17-100-040, which says what the approval standards are and the conditions that apply. We say that the characteristics of the site are not suitable for the proposed use, considering the size and especially location. Location, location, location. Now, in my experience, I had a client, and I think he's even in this room, who told me that when you consider anything, you think about location, location, location. And the location is not suitable for a pot shop. And let me tell you why. Why do you suppose that the child care facility, the schools, and similar things are not to be located within 1,000 feet of a pot shop? Why do you suppose that is? Well, the intent of the language is to protect children. That does not mean that you are limited, but you can look at the policy and say, now just a minute, should we be protecting children? I went to the bother last week, and Robert and I wrote the letters that we sent to go talk to the woman who runs the theater. And that's a very child-friendly place. Guess what she does? She has some kind of a deal with the schools where the children get a special kind of tickets, and even they so that the children can go with someone to accompany them. Now, that's been there. When I was in grade school, I watched every single movie and all through the Second World War. I watched the horrible films that showed what the Nazis and the Japanese were doing to the people that they had under their control. So that means as I was 5 years old, at least I could go into that theater, and it's always been child-friendly. Thank God my father is not alive. He would be most horrified and may take things into his own hands if someone said that we're going to put a hot shop next to that facility. Then if you move even closer to it, kitty corner directly, you have a place where there are always young people, and they look to me like they're high school age, and they are out there running up and down the street in their shorts and with some kind of things that they wrap around their legs so that they get more exercise. So do you want a facility like this with the people who come and go there, with many of the children of this community who use them? I think that it is also a violation of the provisions that dictate against pot being within 1,000 feet of a school facility or child care center. There are 2 facilities within less than 1,000 feet of the proposed facility. Others, whoever they might be in this room, may quibble about the meaning of whether, quote, exist means the facility must be up and running, or is the granting of the permit that you gave on June 12 sufficient? Is that existence? Well, now, come on, folks. If you were going to try to do something and change the use of the building, the first thing you would do is go get the permit. June 12, I don't even know if the order has been signed. All I have to submit to you, and I intend to make it a part of this record, is the motion and the second and the passing of the preliminary draft of the hearing. I suggest that you have the power and authority to interpret your own law and decide whether exist means that someone has been granted a conditional use permit. Otherwise, why ask you for anything at all? I mean, why bother? If the citizens cannot depend upon your previous actions. We also say that you should find that the proposal does not comply with the policies of the comprehensive plan. This community has made great efforts and strides toward economic development, not the least of which was a complete review of the downtown area. I went to meetings right over in the same theater we were talking about, where some high-blown architects and planners and experts came and talked about downtown development. In all of that testimony, I never saw anybody say we ought to have a few pot shops downtown. And the proposal flies in the face of the establishing this community as Halloween Town USA. I'm going to submit to you photos, and here you go, Mr. Lucas. You know. The front sheet is a summary of what the rest of the exhibit contains. And the interesting thing about the exhibits is that the Little Spooks parade starts right at the corner where the pot shop will be. So the ones over 21 can stagger in there and get the pot, and the children can go up there and get their parade. Let's get to the emotional part of the proposal. If you will go through that exhibit, it's self-explanatory. I only changed one picture, and that's where I put the red arrow on the first page to show you where the pot shop was wanting to be.
Did you get one of those?
I ask that you interpret your code in accordance with its intent and what was the purpose of limiting pot shops within is a yellow sign this big that says child care facilities available.
Right.
So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
What is it?
Did you want that?
Next,
Yeah, I was gonna give,
Al Peterson, 101 St. Helens Street. My office is across the street. I'm also a member of the Children's Trust. And I'm not going to address all of the things that I'd like to address. I just want to address a few policy things that aren't specifically written into the code, but I think are disappointing. I'm disappointed that our city decided to sell 8 acres to a pot producer. I'm disappointed that regardless of which way you decide tonight, this decision may go to the same individuals who decided to sell an 8-acre piece of property to a pot producer. So I'm a little bit concerned, and I don't know exactly the legal ramifications because I'm not a lawyer, that regardless of what you do, this may go up to a higher authority who has already shown their intent. And I'm somewhat disappointed in that I feel like our city council has sold out to the pot industry. But I don't know what legal foot anybody has to stand on because that's the reality. I have been involved in at least 8 years, probably close to 10 now, since I moved back, in various planning efforts to attempt to improve the conditions of the area. I don't see where marijuana is a positive aspect that can contribute to those efforts. I think that the city council sold out, and for whatever reason, believed these supposed 1,000 jobs that were supposedly going to come, which I haven't seen materialize yet, and I have my doubts that they will materialize. But I have sat in your position, and I have had to look at these language, and I don't envy you now in having to make this decision. I am against this proposal. I agree with the former testimony against this proposal. And all of the testimony that was said, I don't need to repeat.
thank you, Al.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else? Not seeing anybody. Okay, do we have a rebuttal by the applicant?
So I would just say that, if we're looking at things per code, then, obviously, the application right now as it exists should be conditionally approved. I understand that, even though I grew up in Portland, that I'm still an outsider coming into, a community that has a lot of history and a lot of people, have a very secure vested interest in wanting to see the best for their community. specifically, per OLCC rule, I mean, and Measure 91, public consumption is not allowed. And so, not in the park, not, not anywhere unless in the privacy of your own home. And so, when we think about marijuana in the community, I mean, we educate our customers to, medicate at home, and that's part of what the OLCC also forces us to provide to the customers, which is material and educational, or educational material to basically say consumption is meant to be in the privacy of your own home and not in public. And so, I just want to emphasize that, again, it's not that I want to create a high-end business, but, I do want to be upstanding member of the community, and I appreciate the decision.
Thanks.
Wait just a second, I have a question for if you don't mind.
I do too.
You're talking about medical marijuana. So there's medical marijuana and then there's recreational marijuana. If you have your store there, are you going to be serving the medical community or
We would
both?
be serving both the recreational and medical community. So we have, basically as a retailer, we can opt in medical patients as well.
I have a question. Have any of your establishments ever received any like violations from the OLCC, or do you have any complaints or anything like that?
No. In fact, one of my locations was a block away from the North Portland Police Precinct. And, we would check in with them regularly to make sure, we weren't a nuisance to any of, what they do. And, we haven't, none of the businesses that have ever received any formal complaints, from patrons or the OLCC or anything like this.
But you've moved,
I-
you're not there now? You're not a block from the precinct now?
No, I'm not. I have another location now that's about a mile away. So it's going to be northeast.
I had a question. Do you have any issues or do you have any process for controlling smell that emanates from the dispensing of marijuana products?
Yeah, so what usually I do is I install, first of all, like usually the existing sheetrock I will replace, and then I'll install a vapor barrier, and then just make sure sufficient caulk everything. And then also there's like carbon filters that I install. There used to be where consumption was allowed on site for patients that were employees of the facility, but that's no longer the case. So there's no medication whatsoever on site. Because occasionally, actually, coincidentally with the other location, there was literally a restaurant right next door, and it was in the Midi Mall, and police officers would go to the restaurant all the time. And at that point, we were a medical facility. We had patients that would consume on site, and with all the carbon filters and the vapor barriers, there was no emanating smell. But that wouldn't be an issue.
Something that's happened at other such facilities in our community is it's become a real, it's almost like a smoking section in front of them, where other neighboring businesses can no longer prop open their doors, that the streets and the planter boxes are littered with cigarette butts, that kind of thing, that people tend to hang around, whether they're employees or customers. But it becomes a detriment to neighboring businesses, and I just would imagine those second-story apartments that live there, if your customers or your employees that are working the store are taking their breaks and they're all smoking out next to the building, that wouldn't be very fun to sit on their patio and be smelling that, because a chiropractor's office, you go in and do your work and you leave. There isn't a hangout.
Yeah, and so there, and definitely with, you know, and I was referring to an older time frame of the industry, but currently, and, in order for me to not receive formal complaints from the OLCC, there must not be any public medication outside of our facilities, because that could be grounds for a formal complaint. And so, me personally, I make it, a very stated point when I'm training employees that they must be on the lookout to make sure that there is no medication outside of their building. Because, there are times, let's say, where somebody will get in their car and then they will light something, and that is, again, against the rules, because they're not supposed to medicate. That's basically the same as drinking and driving in their car. So, I mean, I've only seen that several times, and I've been in storefronts for now 5 years, but every time that's happened, like, I've physically gone to the car and say, hey, you're putting us at jeopardy. We can't have you do that, and that's something that you have to do in practice.
I'm curious if you've talked to the other business owners. They're not here, but I didn't know if you'd spoken to, say, the owner of the movie theater or the other businesses across the street, if you've had any interaction with them.
No, but I would be welcome to talk with them and answer any questions.
I mean, the business community down here on First Street is pretty tight and pretty close together, and it would be a good idea to work with them together, so then people feel open that this isn't working, you need to change something up or do something different.
Well,
To
that's, again, I think of being a part of the community, and, I mean, my educational background is, I studied urban planning and community development, and, that's, it's a big part of, like, I don't want to just say it, but, in terms of building consensus, I mean, it is a part of the community, so I don't want to just say that and not follow up with people that are concerned, that are residents, that are business owners, that are around it. So, I make it a point to talk with them, just for the 1 minute process.
'Cause I just want everybody has the right to do what they want within the law and their property, but there are other longstanding businesses within just a couple of feet of where you are that don't want to lose their livelihood because of activities that are happening on your property.
Yeah, definitely. I would take that.
Can I ask you to clarify what the comment you made? You said something about nobody can smoke outside, but they can't smoke inside either, can they?
No.
They can't medicate either
They can
inside or
only,
outside?
they can only medicate inside of privacy.
Their
Or
own home.
Privacy or their own land. But it may,
But that doesn't happen.
How do you handle the cash from sales?
We bank through Maps Credit Union, so, there's, so it's, a local outfit as opposed to a firm. That's pretty much, there's, I think, Maps and then another outfit in Washington, so that's who we bank with. But yeah, I deal with cash with Maps.
Yeah, I just know there's sometimes they get targeted because there is a huge amount of cash, and so I just wonder the
Yeah.
safety of the area.
Take cash out of it. So they would never have the remaining cash, is sales.
Robert, could you respond to Buzzy's comment about people hanging around outside? Does that happen on your tour? Do you allow that to happen?
I've never seen it. It's usually, what it is, it's very similar to, a convenience store transaction, but in a way where people don't hang outside. It's in and out. It's people do not linger, they're not smoking in a circle outside the store. They're not smoking in a circle, like even 100 feet away from the store or anywhere close. It's usually something that
Well, let's let him finish, and then we can bring you up again. Okay. Is that, do we have any other questions from the commission? Okay. Would you like to make one more comment? Come on up to the mic, please.
We have two other stores in town, one out in the highway, one on Columbia Boulevard, and I'm just curious what makes him feel that he can do a better job than the other two stores?
Well.
Sales wise.
I would just say because I've been in the business for now more than 5 years, and there's a lot of companies that I know that maybe do not do as much, like in terms of working with the community, and they're looking at it strictly from the perspective of trying to create this big brand. But for me, I just
Let me rephrase this. Where are you gonna get your clientele from that the other two stores don't already have?
well, I would assume that it would be from other people that in the area, people that are in the community, the surrounding communities.
So what type of hours would you be looking out for?
Normal business hours that
Referring to closure of that.
would be definitely closing before, let's say,
4 o'clock in the afternoon.
but I wouldn't be open. The OLCC legally allows these facilities to be open from 7 to 10, but I would just probably be open. I haven't defined my hours yet, but I'll be closing before 10.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, hearing no further responses, a public record is closed. This matter is returned to the table for deliberations and oral discussion.
Is there anywhere in our code that we can consider economic development when deciding on a conditional use?
I'll be right back. I need to get my comprehensive plan. The connection would be on page 2 of the report. There are the general conditions for conditional use permit approval. And number F, the use will comply with the applicable policies of the comprehensive plan. I don't have that book in front of me, so I will be right back.
All right.
Thank you.
Can we take a 2-minute recess?
2-minute recess. You.
Definition of daycare. Do you have a definition for daycare?
Yeah, I'm getting it.
Because parents use the movie as daycare all the time. I'm splitting hairs.
I think it has to do with registering with the state. So, Audrey, the definition of child care facility is a commercial establishment enrolling children under the age of 13 years where tuition, fees, or other forms of compensation for the care of children is charged, and which is licensed or approved to operate as a child care center, also called daycare, children's center, or a day nursery.
So, as you get, if you have 1908 up. Okay.
Okay, we are back in session.
So 1908 is the city's economic goals and policies. And let's see what we got here. You want to go to policies specifically?
Sure, yeah. I could just tell they were reading, so I felt bad, but sorry, guys.
You can always look behind. Yeah, okay.
Can you read that, Greg?
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
I can't.
Tell me when you're ready. Yeah, of course. I'm gonna scroll down a little bit.
It's fine. Can we go down, is there a specific section for the riverfront?
No.
Oh, okay.
Comp
No.
plan is
That's up
general.
above.
So there's two places to look. There's the economic goals and policies, and of course, one of the policies is to make waterfront development a high priority. But then, if we go to, because this property is zoned general commercial, so has a comprehensive plan designation of general commercial. The question is, there's something there that you can hang your hat on. So this is gonna be, 1912, yeah, 1912, so I should go up.
Well, yeah, that F, reserving areas for business use by limiting incompatible uses.
But it's a listed conditional use, so I think that's more for, I think that would be a hard, we've added this use as a conditional use in our general commercial zone. So it's more about your locational concerns.
So you would have to connect the dots to, if you were, concerned about the location, you would look at, the standard that was mentioned. 1B, the characteristics of the site are suitable for the proposed use considering size, shape, location, topography, and natural features. If you wanted to use the location argument, you want to focus on that standard. And you could also use F, the use shall comply with the applicable policies of the comprehensive plan, preserve areas by eliminating, incompatible things. If you can make findings of incompatibility and of location issues, you would probably want to focus on B and F with that. But then you have to make findings to back that up.
Can I ask Agnes Peterson a question?
If the chair would like to reopen the hearing.
We could reopen the hearing.
At one time, there was a church that had a daycare center underneath your office. Is that daycare center still in use?
There now. As a matter of fact, there's a big yellow sign
Says childcare.
that says childcare, and it says it's free, although your definition says childcare is somebody who pays. But if you look at my building, as you drive by, I don't know the next part of your contact if that's the one, but if you go by, there's a big sign that says that right in the front window of that church.
So
When we approved that church, That was one of the things they were gonna offer was free childcare to their,
Did that say that? I can't
yeah,
remember.
that was one of
Well, there you are.
You mentioned,
Yeah, it wasn't, I looked at the application, maybe it was said orally, but it wasn't in writing.
yeah, it was an oral, and they were also gonna have after-school tutoring.
Because I did check that file today,
Yeah.
just to refresh my
but
memory.
they are there, the kids are there on a regular basis.
I'm there every day, and they're coming and going. As a matter of fact, they have in the window closest to the theater is more of a meeting room, but right in the window next to the Union Hall, there's children in there with little toys and babysitters and everything else in there.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, you may.
I checked with the city today, there's no business license at that location for any kind of childcare center.
Yeah.
You might be doing something voluntarily free, but it's not an accepted license.
Yeah. Agnes noted that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The hearing, public hearing is closed now. We will back to deliberation.
The whole area is a gathering place for young people, that whole block, from the movie theater, in front of the church, and the gym. So,
I don't know how in conscience we can put a facility like that close to, not one, but potentially two childcare facilities.
Well, we approved one facility, but they're not licensed yet, but we know the intent of that building.
Well, I think she's also referring to the church or
Yeah,
the
I'm referring to
religious
the church
operation that also has
Right,
daycare.
right.
that also
So, from the-
already is active in their,
yeah, but the code's saying licensed correctly, isn't that right?
The code. No marijuana retailer and/or medical marijuana dispensary shall be permitted to locate within 1,000 feet of any public or private childcare facility, school.
Private,
That lawfully exists at the time the conditional use permit application is deemed complete.
well, there you go. It's a private daycare facility. Doesn't say it's licensed, but it serves the people that go to that facility.
Yeah, it depends on how you want to interpret that application. So I looked at it, and they specifically, so one, if you think the conditional use permit is enough to say, to put the foot in the door for the purposes of applying the 1,000-foot rule, that's one question. The other question is the Resonate Church. Their application said religious assembly. That's what their application proposal was. And so it gets into, and this is where, you get these 1,000 shades of gray. Religious assemblies can have a lot of uses
Auxiliary
that are related.
purposes.
Yeah.
Right.
And so is it the auxiliary or the principal use that should apply? And, that's where interpretation.
Well, let me ask you this question. Just for being the devil's advocate, if you had a church, a regular church facility, where you had regular congregation, and as part of their program, they had a regular daycare service, and you had a marijuana operation that was proposing to move in, would it be considered that within the 1,000 feet of that operation?
That's the question.
Well,
so some cases are very clear. We do have churches in town that have vested, licensed daycare facilities, like the one mentioned in the report.
Right, or like Snoopy Land.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you have ones that arguably are more elusive from a principal use standpoint. And that's the argument that's been presented to you is, one argument is it should apply, the other one is it shouldn't. And that's the hot potato.
When Carl Kaufman, is it Kaufman? Okay. How long, he had a year, didn't he, on being able to use his establishment?
It's good for a year and a half, and then what are the time extensions for? Probably 2.5. He kept it. He gave it CPR for a while.
This lady asked for a daycare, how long is that good for?
A year and a half with a 1 year time extension.
So she has a year and a half to get her license.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, my other argument, putting aside the daycare issue, my other argument is we've spent a lot of time and money and effort over the last, I'd say, year and a half, 2 years, working on planning for the development of the downtown area. And I don't mean to disparage any commercial operation, legal commercial operation, but at the same time, I think in the far broader view, we have to look at what is best for this specific downtown area in light of our plans or long-term plans for its development. And how, a very limited area with commercial potential can be impacted by each, by the businesses. I think that's something else we need to throw in the mix.
Well, we've got a code that's being tested now, so that's just why we're here. And so we, at some point in time, maybe need to revisit that. But not at this time.
Yep.
To our interpretation.
The definition of childcare? It was just in general definitions.
Have to be child.
So a couple of you spoke up. Would anyone else like to talk?
I'm waiting. Come on. You can do it. You're torn. Okay.
I am.
The issues that are tearing you apart?
Well, we can make a motion, I suppose, for, and then we can vote again, if that's what we're inclined to do.
I want to ask the commissioner, what have been the responses? You alluded to some comments from some of the business people or property owners from the other areas.
Oh.
There have been operations of these facilities.
I get commentary in the community. No one has come into a council meeting. So like I've spoken to people that are on Columbia Boulevard near 18th Street, and they make comments.
But there has been nothing.
Nobody comes in here, nobody writes a letter, but it's unfortunate that 90% of the people in our community will never say a word, on the record. And they're like, it is what it is. It's voted legal. There's nothing we can do. It doesn't mean they're happy about it, but they just passively complain.
So we don't really have anything as far as police reports or anything like that.
Not that I'm aware of. My issue is that I heard you guys discuss mitigating conditions like containing your litter, containing your waste, containing your smell. And I'm not sure if our code enforcement is following up on that to to where neighboring businesses feel supported in maintaining their quality of life. Sometimes property owners are afraid to say something because, or businesses that rent, their property owner is friends with the other property owner and they don't want to make a bad landlord. So they're just trying to make nice. And in a real situation, it would be nice for me if everybody did the law and didn't stomp on other people's business. But I don't know how you get that supervised in the code, because that takes people to go out and check.
Okay.
Well, I guess we have two choices. Number one, we can deny it, but we better be damn sure we have reasons to deny it, or it's going to be appealed. The other, the other
Just a recommendation.
choice is for this commission,
It's approved by you.
is for this
And we
commission
the appeal.
to impose the legal rules that we can on making sure that the operation is as safe and environmentally sound without any impact on the neighboring businesses or residents as possible, just like we did in the other 3 or 2 cases that came before this commission. Those are the two options. Deny it, but make sure that we have reasons, or approve it, but make sure that we put into place strict conditions that will, as best as we can, safeguard the operations.
Do I hear a motion?
Well, I guess I'll propose that we approve the application with the rules that, number one, we have the crime prevention plan is proposed, trash management, the revised site plan. What I propose as far as the location of the trash container is, I think the best place for that, for an for an enclosure would be this area between the building and the one next door to it. I think that would be the best location for an enclosure.
You all don't have to propose a location. They'll just provide a location based on the plan that they're going to give.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's encompassed in the condition.
Okay.
Yeah. That's probably where it'll end up, though, if I were to guess.
We had, in a previous time, required that the trash cans be locked. And that needs to happen so that people passing by can't go in to see what they might get out of the dumpster dive. Several years ago, we did have somebody who went into a garbage can, big trash receptacle, and froze to death. It was real tragic, and it sticks in my mind, so I don't want to see a tragedy like that happen again.
Well, that's,
You might find a few minutes inside, except for the day pickup too.
I think most of the Old Town businesses do that regardless, because they have so many people on the street at night, and if they don't put anything outside, there's nothing for people to hang around for. They go through the garbage.
Ginny, your
can.
mic's off.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
They go through the garbage can at the haircut place. What do they get in there? Bet they're in that garbage can.
All right, that was a motion?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Not yet.
the wheel stops, the disabled parking space. We have to decide on the landscaping, whether we want to increase landscaping to additional. I don't have any objections to maintaining what it is.
I think obscuring landscaping, if we asked them to plant hedges or such, would actually increase the possibility of crime.
Just say again, I didn't hear.
If we were to ask them to put hedges in or some other obscuring growth, I think that could, in fact, work against us and increase the chance of crime.
Yeah.
Because people could hide.
I think it would also be important to have something where there's no loitering.
How are you gonna monitor that?
Well, so you can impose time, place, and manner conditions. And let's say you had a clause that said no loitering. So, yeah, that's a good question. How do you monitor it? But, so let's say, that's operating for a while and people start hanging out there. We start getting complaints. So we go back in the file and, hey, look, it says no loitering. And then the code says a condition of a land use permit, non-compliance with the condition is a violation of the development code. So we tell code enforcement not supposed to be loitering, or the police, so they can go to them and, be it adults or children or whatever, whoever's loitering. Well, you can't let us do that. No. You have a marijuana retailer. This was a specific condition of approval, which was approved by the planning commission, not appealed by the applicant or owner or anybody else at the time. So that decision stands. So it is a law. You have to move on. So the point is, it would be reactionary.
The only problem with having an anti-loitering rule or law is the fact that that's only good for that specific premises. There's no, it's not going to increase. Everybody goes on over across the street and loiters in the park at night.
That's correct.
So, let's face it.
It would be site specific.
In reality, it's only good for that small section of the property to which it's confined.
Yep.
So, I'm more concerned about making sure that there's enough lighting. But then a lot of that has to do with state rules too, that they have to abide by. So a lot of that is probably taken care of by the state. The other issue that I have a question on is the hours of operation. Now, did we put in any stipulation for the other marijuana businesses in town as far as hours of operation?
No, but remember, each location has its unique circumstances. And so, if you feel a certain location warrants it, it's certainly something you can impose, and it's one of the things specifically called out as the potential conditions you can impose, limiting the hours, days, place, and manner of operation. That's, in fact, the first one.
Well, I would like to see it earlier rather than later in the evening, as far as, the maximum hour that they could be open till into the evening. So, 7, 8 o'clock, something of that, 9 o'clock.
Could we match it with what OLCC allows the liquor store to do?
Well, I don't.
They can be open Sundays and late.
Yeah, I don't know what the OLCC. You're talking about liquor store, packaged liquor stores?
Yeah.
He stated it was till 10 p.m.
7, isn't it 7 o'clock?
They close at 7.
7, I think.
They're talking about liquor.
Yeah. What are the other ones open to? Do you know? I
Yeah.
just don't think that downtown it needs to be open till 10, 11 o'clock at night. I think that's just begging for trouble. So, something around 8, 9 o'clock. If you want to go earlier, that's fine with me. But that's something I think we need to think about.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think with residential.
So, you started a motion, Greg.
Well, yeah, I'm waiting for
Okay.
input from
Gotcha.
the other commissioners. Do they have a input as far as
Input as far
hours
as
of
time?
operation?
I'd say between 8 and 9 is
Okay.
plenty of time,
Yeah.
Okay,
personally.
all right. Well, since the
And
proponent,
most of your people downtown are around within those hours, but later on, it's like ghost town.
exactly, exactly.
You just mentioned 8 o'clock, so.
So 8, 9 o'clock, whichever, take your pick.
Well, if the applicant has indicated he'd be willing to go to just to 8, let's do the 8.
Sounds good.
Okay. I didn't hear it either.
Well, I don't, we're close to that, so, your decision would be,
My recommendation would be 8.
okay.
So, anyway, that's my
Any-
motion.
Any change from weekends to week?
Give them this Friday till 9.
All right, that's fine. Friday and Saturday or just Friday?
I don't know, are you open 7 days a week?
Early, yeah. Okay, so 8 on Monday through Thursday, 9 Friday and Saturday, 7 on Sunday.
Whenever.
Closed on Ferry Festival.
All right, so that's my motion.
Sorry.
So your motion is the conditions as recommended
Yeah.
with an additional one limiting the hours of operation as discussed.
Right. And get rid of the landscaping screening unless one of the other commissioners has.
Yeah, that was just a placeholder.
Right.
And that time is 8 p.m. all days except Friday and Saturday, 9 p.m.
And Sunday would be 7.
Okay.
Or earlier.
And that is to ensure compatibility, right? That's your intent?
Correct. Compatibility with the neighborhood.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do we have the in favor of, the ayes? And nays?
Nay.
You said aye?
Nay.
Nay. So,
Oh, I said aye, sorry.
you said
Okay.
aye. 2 ayes, 3 nays.
I gotta look at my chart now.
I have one too. If you need, we have 3 nays. And 1 absent.
Oh, you don't get into that again?
There's something happens.
The city.
Is that the one we adopted for the planning commission?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not, it's pretty much the same.
You and me.
7 members on the board. We got the quorum. Five voted. Okay, yeah, so the motion officially doesn't pass.
Oh, no, it was rejected.
Hmm?
So
We have
you
to-
have, you have one of two options. Either somebody can entertain another motion.
Why?
Motion
Well,
failed.
will you let me finish? You can either entertain another motion, or it just dies and
There's no.
there's no decision.
Do they
I
have the
need-
opportunity to go to city council?
I know. Who gets the appeal?
The council.
There you go.
I need to, you remember when we adopted the planning commission rules? I think you have to make a decision.
Yeah, I think that was.
Well, the decision there was a decision. The decision was to deny the application. That was the decision.
But that wasn't the motion.
That wasn't the motion.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Uh,
So we have to go back,
I-
so we have to go back and make another, motion. We have to go back and make another motion that we deny the application. So, we deny the motion, but you can always make another motion. So change the
So
conditions,
moved.
say, change the conditions
Okay.
or whatever.
I think they're working.
We need a new motion.
I said
Okay.
so moved, you've got it.
Okay.
Well, what is the
It's-
motion?
What's the
Yeah.
motion?
Against.
Okay, we make a motion where
to
against,
deny- Yeah,
So
it's
deny
to deny the
to
application.
deny. Okay, all right. All those in favor of that,
Is there a second?
Aye,
aye?
Was there a
Wait,
second?
I don't know who seconded that.
Sheila did.
Oh.
Okay. Aye?
Aye.
Catherine? Nay.
Nay.
2 nays, 3 ayes.
Well, what about you?
I can't vote.
No, he only votes to break ties
Except to break
Except
the
to break the tie.
They can't make it.
Huh?
for our commission rules.
Now, are we legal there?
Yeah, they're adopted in our code.
Yeah. Aye?
Nay.
No, on the motion to deny the second one.
Yes. 2 of us voted no.
Okay, thank you.
It was 3 to 2.
It was just the reverse of the other.
All right, let me look at this close to make sure we're doing everything right.
And it's our voting table there, which is codified
Yeah.
specifically for the planning commission.
So the
So-
the applicant has the option to appeal to the planning commission.
The
Or
Kent
the
City
city
Council.
council.
City council, yes.
Can you read that at the end there?
Yeah, the final written decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the city council. The notice of the decision will be mailed to all persons who testified or submitted comments, and the appeal deadline will be included in the notice.
Now I need to understand, the denial is based on the proximity to daycares
Yes.
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 and incompatibility based on the comprehensive plan.
With the neighborhood congestion of the children in the school using the movie theater for their.
Okay. I got it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming in.
Signature?
So moved.
What that is there's 2 options. They can wait for me to write the findings and then review it as a group and sign it at their next meeting, or they can authorize the chairperson to sign when they're ready, which just quickens the process. And that's typical. It's extraordinarily atypical otherwise. But that's why that we had that formality. So
Yeah. So there's a motion? Has it been approved?
Second, approve that I sign?
Yes.
Okay,
Go for it.
all right, nays?
August is
I will sign that.
August is pretty loaded.
Excuse me.
Right, and it's only one meeting.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right.
okay. Millard Road property.
So this is not essential. We can push this to
Table
next
this.
meeting
Yeah, can we
if you'd
table it
like.
because
Yeah,
of the-
what's the, can we just have a little heads up? Have we visited this before at all?
I don't think so.
Okay,
So basically, is the city owns this property on Millard Road, a portion of which is part of the ill-fated hospital project and the Columbia Health District.
Yeah.
And it's public lands, it's zoned public lands, and the council wants to rezone it so it can be used for something.
are they gonna liquidate it probably, or are they not trying to do that?
I don't know.
Well, I gotta get my first permit
Yeah.
first.
The
The
One thing at a time.
because the hospital property came to us as a direct result of a tax district, the council, not legally, the council just ethically, morally, feels like because a taxing district paid for the property, that we can't profit by the property, this community should profit by the property. So by planning to meet some of the unmet housing needs in our community for 55 and older and workforce housing
Okay.
might be that venue.
So so there's a variety of ways we can go with rezoning it. And I've heard many things depending on which counselor I talk to, depending if I'm talking to the city administrator, depending if you're talking to the neighbors, depending if you're talking to Brady Preheim.
Well, it sounds
So
like-
there's
it sounds-
the intent is to get feedback to figure out we have to rezone it because the public land zoning is extraordinarily limited. And so the discussion is to get feedback to figure out what the heck direction we're going to go to hopefully minimize how pissed off some people are going to be when we rezone it.
Well, it sounds like this is.
And to help guide the council, of course.
Well, that's why I'm asking, because then we can think about this.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this presentation, it's one we had a public forum on. We also want to vet it with the Planning Commission and the Parks Commission, and then based on that comment, go back to the council and try to figure out. We want to try to figure something out before we do the formal process.
Was this some wetlands mediation?
Yeah,
How
it
do
would.
you take it out of that?
Well, you can't.
Yeah.
The school district used it for wetland mediation. So, yeah, some of those wetlands are basically untouchable.
But since the hospital used it also for that, but they didn't do their project, so that goes back to residential or whatever zone you want to.
That's the question.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the question is what do we zone it? And it could be several different zones, could be, so that's the discussion.
Okay.
So it's,
I'm confused. There is a health center there with a clinic and.
no,
There's nothing.
This is a vacant lot.
no, there was,
This is near where the health center is.
no.
Even near-
It was a project that failed.
This is up behind Bing's.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Whole different
That was
place.
well off.
And we have maps that talk about location, and we would get into that. But because it's close to 11 o'clock, I think the planning commission's choosing to table this till next meeting to really get into the details.
I thought this was covered last month.
We talked about it
Nope. Oh.
Sure.
because we had a hearing.
No, residential.
Residential.
Yep. Yeah, residential. You have mostly houses and a couple churches in the area.
Somebody's pointed out that there is a trail connect that would take people down to the high school.
This is all county.
Connection was
Yeah.
illegal to begin with.
Mr. Chairman, can we
Yeah,
move?
big lots.
Yep, okay, acceptance agenda, let's move on.
Thank you.
So approved. So motion to approve all three.
Second, it's been motion and seconded to approve the acceptance agenda. Aye?
Favor? Hey, say aye, say aye.
Aye, good job.
Okay,
Nays?
that's
Okay.
5 ayes.
All right,
Thank
planning director decisions.
Any comments?
Any comments on that?
No
Where it
comments.
links in to the
Anything, any,
is right
Okay,
between
activity
here
reports.
and there.
Anything?
J-
Longer distance than what they were.
Jacob, you have any report?
The link in, and that
No,
Why?
Okay.
So move we adjourn.
I'm done.
Moved.
Hey, Russ.
Yes.
I wanted to start asking you, can you say adjourned at a certain time when you close it? It helps with minutes.
Oh,
If you can remember.
uh,
The bewitching hour. How about the bewitching
So
hour?
10:57.
oh,
just say
say
we're
the time.
Yeah, like say we're
we
adjourned at 10.
adjourn